My husband's dad said he should handle our money because women don't need to worry about finances. When I said no, he smirked and said, then don't expect support. My husband, Alex, just said, it's easier this way. I didn't see it coming. I thought Alex and I were a team. I thought we'd make big choices together, especially about money. But I was wrong. I probably missed the warning signs, or maybe I saw them and just looked the other way. When I married Alex, I didn't think I was also signing up for his dad, Richard, to treat me like I was clueless just because I'm a woman. Richard believed women should stay at home, not work or deal with money. He didn't care that I had a degree in accounting, a full-time job, and probably knew more about finances than anyone in their family. To him, I was just a woman, so I didn't get a say. I thought Alex wasn't like him. He never acted that way while we were dating. Sure, he let me make a lot of choices, but I thought it was because he trusted me. What I didn't realize was that he was used to his dad being in charge. He didn't know how to think for himself. Right after we got married, we visited Richard in his big office at home. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, like he thought he was some kind of big-shot businessman. In our family, he said, sounding smug, the men take care of the money. I laughed. I thought he was joking. I said, that's nice, but Alex and I will handle our money together. He didn't like that. He gave me a look, like I was a little kid saying I wanted to fly to the moon. Then he said, don't expect any support. That's when I realized he wasn't giving advice. He was giving me a choice: let him and Alex control the money, or get cut off. Alex just said, it's easier this way. But easier for who? Not me. At first, it was small stuff. Alex wouldn't tell me about bills he paid or money he moved. He started making money decisions on his own. It was always Dad thinks we should or Dad says it's smart. I tried to ignore it, but then I saw something bad. Our savings account, our joint account, was missing $155,000. I asked Alex, where did the money go? Oh, he said like it was no big deal. Dad moved it into an investment. I stared at him. What do you mean he moved it? He said it's a smart move. He's always handled the family's money. I felt sick. And you just let him? Alex looked at me like I was the crazy one. Why wouldn't I? That's when I knew he'd always pick his dad over me. So I stopped fighting them, or at least, that's what I let them think. I opened my own bank account, quietly switched my paycheck to go there. From then on, I kept my money separate, and I said nothing. But I wasn't done. I gathered proof, bank statements, emails, texts where Richard made financial decisions without me. I saved everything. And then I waited. Things were quiet. Alex didn't notice my paycheck wasn't going into our joint account, or if he did, he didn't say anything. But I knew Richard wasn't finished. Then one night, Alex mentioned another investment Richard wanted to make. Don't worry, he said, eating dinner. Dad says it's low risk, high reward. I dropped my fork. How much this time? He shrugged, not sure, but Dad needs access to the joint account again. I smiled. Okay, but I think the bank added security. They might call me first. Yeah, makes sense, Alex said. The next day, I went to the bank. I told them not to let anyone take money out without calling me first. 3 days later, they called. Mrs. Taylor, someone tried to transfer $20,000. We blocked it. Who tried? I asked. Richard Taylor. Of course. That night, Alex came home like nothing was wrong. A few minutes later, his phone rang. I could hear Richard yelling. The bank won't let me transfer the money. They froze the account. Alex frowned. What? That doesn't make sense. He looked at me. Did you do something? I leaned back. Do what, exactly? The joint account, it's frozen. Maybe because someone was taking money without my permission. Richard was still shouting through the phone. Fix this, Alex. Alex sighed. Just tell the bank to unlock it. Dad needs the money. I stared at him. No. Alex blinked. What? I'm not unfreezing anything, I said. Sophie, you're making this harder than it has to be. Am I? I asked. Because I never agreed to let your dad risk our savings. Alex said, it's not a risk, it's an investment. I laughed. Really? What return are we getting? Any numbers? Silence. Richard yelled, let me talk to Sophie. Alex said, maybe just talk to him. I have nothing to say to him. I stood up. Tell him the money is off limits. Alex didn't answer. That's when I knew he wasn't just being controlled, he didn't care. I had to act fast. I started digging into Richard's investments. I didn't just want to stop him, I wanted to expose him. And I found something. Richard wasn't just taking from our account, he was stealing from everyone. Alex's brother? His savings were almost gone. His mom? Richard had taken half her retirement. This wasn't just bad judgment. It was theft. And then I found the worst part, a loan for $50,000 in Alex's name. It was taken out 6 months ago. The payments were coming from our joint account. And it had already defaulted. I looked over the loan paperwork. There was still over $40,000 left to pay, and it was all in Alex's name, not Richard's. I felt ice run through my veins. This wasn't just a bad financial move, this was fraud. That night, I acted normal. I cooked dinner, smiled at Alex's dumb jokes, but inside, I was furious. Then Richard called. I put my fork down. Alex answered and put the call on speaker. Richard was furious. Alex, what's going on? The bank flagged a transfer, they're investigating now, they froze the account again. Alex looked confused. Investigating what? What are you talking about? Richard growled. Sophie must have called them again. That woman is ruining everything. I clenched my jaw. Alex rubbed his forehead. Dad, can you calm down? What transfer are you talking about? There was a pause. Then Richard said quietly. The loan payment. I saw the exact moment Alex's brain broke. He stared at the phone. Loan payment? He repeated. Richard sighed like he was explaining to a child. Yes, the business loan, the one in your name. Alex's face turned pale. What do you mean, in my name? I leaned back and watched it all unfold. You took out a loan in my name? Alex yelled, standing up so fast his chair scraped the floor. Richard replied like it was no big deal. The bank wouldn't approve it under my name. I had to. I nearly laughed. He actually admitted it, on speaker. Alex looked crushed. He sank into his chair, holding his head. Dad, that's fraud. Richard snapped. Watch your mouth. I did this for the family. I've handled our finances for years. Don't act like I'm some criminal. That was enough. I grabbed the phone and ended the call. Alex just sat there, stunned. Then he turned to me. Sophie, did you know? I took a deep breath. I found out today. His hands were shaking. What do we do? I almost felt sorry for him, almost. But this was the man who let his father control everything, who told me to trust Richard, who let this happen. So I looked him in the eye and said, We don't do anything. I do. Richard had no idea what was coming. The next day, I made calls. First, the bank. I sent them everything I had, emails, screenshots, proof of Richard using our money without permission. Then, I called Daniel, Alex's brother. Richard's been stealing from you, I said. There was silence. What? Check your accounts, he's been draining them for 2 years. I heard typing, then a sharp breath. Oh my God, what the hell is this? He did the same to us, and to your mom. Daniel swore. That's her retirement fund, she trusts him. She won't for long. Because I was about to expose everything. That night, Richard was hosting a family dinner. A few business friends were there too. He loved pretending to be the wise, successful head of the family. Perfect. Alex didn't argue when I said we were going. He was still in shock. When we walked in, the house was full of people chatting and laughing. Richard was in his glory, whiskey in hand. His wife, Susan, was smiling and talking to guests like nothing was wrong. I saw Daniel by the kitchen. His jaw was tight. We made eye contact. I nodded. It was time. Richard saw us. My boy, and Sophie, come in, have a drink. I smiled. Oh, we should all get a drink. We've got a lot to talk about. Richard laughed. Something exciting? I tilted my head. You could say that. Daniel stepped forward. Hey, Dad, I checked my accounts today. The room got quiet. Richard's smile slipped. Oh? Daniel's voice was sharp. Turns out, I'm missing $70,000. Guests started whispering. Richard laughed awkwardly. I made some investments for you. Oh yeah? The bank calls it theft, Daniel snapped. Susan looked confused. What's going on? I stepped in. Oh, Susan, you're going to want to hear this. Richard stole from all of us, even you. Her face fell. What? I turned to the room. Here's what happened. Richard drained our savings. He took out a business loan in Alex's name. He moved money from everyone's accounts, without permission. I looked at Susan. He emptied half your retirement fund. Did you know that? Her eyes widened. Richard? Richard's face turned red. Now hold on. I cut him off. We have proof, bank records, emails, and we've reported it. The guests looked shocked. Some were already pulling out their phones. Susan stepped toward him. Is this true? Richard tried to stay calm. I was just moving things around. I didn't mean. Without telling anyone, Danielle shouted, You lied. Susan's voice cracked. You said our money was safe. It's just a temporary. I stepped closer. It's fraud. Then I dropped the final bomb. The bank's launching an investigation. This isn't just a setback, it's a crime. The room gasped. For the first time, Richard looked truly scared. After the guests left, Richard yelled at Alex. You let her do this. You let your wife tear this family apart. Alex stared at him. You tore it apart. Susan packed a bag and left. She didn't say much, but she left. Daniel went no contact. As for Alex, he broke down. He kept apologizing, saying he didn't know, that he should have listened. I believed him, but I couldn't trust him anymore. So I did what I should have done a long time ago. I filed for divorce. The bank moved fast. They froze Richard's accounts. The fraud investigation picked up speed. And the loan? Since it was in Alex's name, Richard thought we'd be stuck with it. Too bad for him. The bank found forged signatures. That meant one thing, Richard was fully responsible. He lost everything, his money, his home, his family. And then came the best part. Richard was arrested for financial fraud. As they cuffed him and walked him out of his house, I looked him in the eye and said, I told you I'd handle my own money.
The glass door of Harrison Technologies felt heavier than usual that morning. Maybe it was the weight of what I carried in my pocket. A stock certificate proving I now own 2% of my father's company. 2% might not sound like much, but it had taken every penny I'd saved over the past 3 years to buy those shares. More importantly, it was just the beginning. My name is Elizabeth Harrison, though nobody at Harrison Technologies knows that. Here, I'm just Beth Williams, the quiet woman who comes in at night to clean offices. The same woman who spent the last 3 years watching, learning, and slowly piecing together her plan while the nighttime security guard dozes at his desk. I adjusted my cleaning cart, making sure the supplies were neatly arranged. Everything had to look normal, especially today. As I pushed the cart toward the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished brass doors. At 28, I looked more like my mother than ever. The same dark hair, the same determined set to my jaw. My father wouldn't recognize me even if he looked straight at me. He hadn't seen me since I was a baby, and he never looked for me since. The elevator doors opened to the executive floor, and I stepped out into the familiar silence of the night shift. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city lights, a view my father enjoyed from his corner office every day. I'd memorized every detail of that office during my late-night cleaning sessions. The vintage sailing photos on the walls, the collection of rare books he never read, and most importantly, the papers he carelessly left on his desk. Evening, Beth, called out Jerry, the night security guard, barely looking up from his crossword puzzle. Quiet night ahead. I smiled and nodded, the same routine we'd followed for 3 years. Jerry had no idea that under my cleaner's uniform, I wore a wireless earpiece connected to my phone. In my pocket, a tiny camera was ready to document anything interesting I might find on Alexander Harrison's desk tonight. Starting with the break room tonight, I said that I knew exactly where I'd be heading first. Harrison Technologies was about to announce a major acquisition, and I needed to know the details before making my next move. As I pushed my cart down the hall, I thought about how it all began. My mother, Sarah Williams, had been a junior accountant at Harrison Technologies 29 years ago. She'd fallen in love with a young, ambitious Alexander Harrison, who was already making a name for himself in the tech industry. The relationship had been brief but intense until she told him she was pregnant. His response had been swift and cruel. A severance package, a non-disclosure agreement, and a clear message to disappear. My mother, young and scared, had taken the money and moved across the country. She'd raised me alone, never hiding the truth about my father but never letting it define me either. Get an education, she'd always said. That's something no one can take from you. I did more than that. I earned my MBA, specialized in corporate finance, and spent 5 years at one of the top investment firms in New York, all while keeping tabs on Harrison Technologies and the father who'd never wanted me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could have walked into Harrison Technologies through the front door, resume in hand, and probably landed a decent position. But that wasn't my plan. I needed to understand the company from the ground up, to see its true inner workings, not just what was presented in board meetings and quarterly reports. I approached Alexander Harrison's office, my heart rate picking up slightly as I inserted my cleaning key into the lock. The familiar click felt different tonight, more significant, maybe because this was the first time I was entering as a shareholder, even if a minor one. The office was exactly as he'd left it, papers scattered across the desk, his laptop closed but not locked away, a security oversight I'd noted months ago, and a half-empty coffee cup perched precariously near the edge of his desk. I started my usual cleaning routine, but my attention was focused on the documents partially hidden under a folder marked confidential. As I dusted his desk, I carefully shifted the papers so my hidden camera could capture the contents. Acquisition details, just as I'd suspected, but something else caught my eye. A personal letter, handwritten on expensive stationery. My hands trembled slightly as I read the first lines. Dear Alexander, as my health continues to decline, we need to discuss the future of Harrison Technologies. It was from Thomas Harrison, my grandfather, the founder of Harrison Technologies. I'd never met him, but I'd studied everything about him while planning my strategy. He'd built this company from nothing, turning a small software development firm into a tech giant. Now, at 82, he was apparently facing his mortality and questioning his son's leadership. I photographed the letter quickly, my mind already racing with the implications. If Thomas Harrison was worried about the company's future under Alexander's leadership, it could explain the rumors I'd been hearing about potential board restructuring. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made me freeze. Not Jerry's shuffling walk. These were purposeful steps, accompanied by voices. I quickly returned everything to its original position and grabbed my cleaning supplies, making sure to look busy as the office door opened. Need to handle this carefully, a male voice was saying. The old man can't just. Alexander Harrison stopped short when he saw me, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. What are you doing here? I kept my eyes down, playing the part of the apologetic cleaner. Sorry, sir. Just finishing up. I'll come back later. No need, he said dismissively. We'll be working late. Skip this office tonight. I nodded and hurried out, pushing my cart past him and the man I recognized as James Porter, the company's CFO. As I closed the door behind me, I caught a glimpse of my father's face, the face I'd studied in magazines and company photos for years. He looked tired, worried even. The letter from my grandfather must have hit harder than I'd thought. Back in the hallway, I let out a slow breath. Close calls were part of the job, but this one felt different. Maybe because I'd seen something in my father's eyes I hadn't expected. Fear. Alexander Harrison, the man who'd built his reputation on being untouchable, was afraid of losing control. I continued my rounds, but my mind was working overtime. The pieces were falling into place faster than I'd anticipated. Thomas Harrison's letter, the acquisition plans, the board restructuring rumors, it all pointed to a company in transition, and transition meant opportunity. 3 years ago, when I first took this job, my plan had been simple. Gather information, build evidence of my father's questionable business practices, and use it to force him to acknowledge me. But somewhere along the way, it had evolved into something bigger. I didn't just want acknowledgement anymore. I wanted what should have been mine all along. A place at Harrison Technologies. Not as a cleaner, not even as Alexander Harrison's daughter, but as someone who could lead this company better than he ever had. The 2% ownership I'd acquired was just the beginning. With the right moves and the information I gathered, I could position myself to take control when the inevitable power struggle began. As I finished my shift and packed up my cleaning cart, I thought about my mother. She'd passed away 2 years ago, never knowing I'd taken this job, never knowing I found a way to infiltrate the company that had once cast her out. Part of me wished she could see me now, but another part was glad she couldn't. She'd always warned me about the price of revenge, about how it could consume you if you weren't careful. This isn't about revenge, I whispered to myself as I walked to my car. This is about justice. But as I drove home to my modest apartment, I couldn't help wondering if there was really a difference. The stock certificate in my pocket felt heavier than ever, a tangible reminder of the line I crossed. There would be no going back now. I parked in my usual spot and took the stairs to my third-floor apartment, my mind already working on the next phase of my plan. The letter from Thomas Harrison had changed the timeline. I needed to move faster, be bolder. If my grandfather was indeed dying, the power structure at Harrison Technologies would soon be up for grabs. Inside my apartment, I went straight to my home office, a small room that looked nothing like the modest dwelling of a cleaning woman. 3 monitors displayed stock charts, company news, and surveillance feeds. A wall of notes and photographs tracked the key players at Harrison Technologies. And in the center of my desk sat a photo I'd stolen from my father's office during my first week on the job. A picture of him and my grandfather at the company's IPO celebration. I pulled out my phone and downloaded the photos I'd taken that night. The acquisition documents would need careful analysis, but it was the letter from Thomas Harrison that held my attention. I read it again, slower this time, taking in every word. Dear Alexander, as my health continues to decline, we need to discuss the future of Harrison Technologies. Your recent decisions have given me cause for concern. The board shares my worries about the direction you're taking the company. I built this company on innovation and integrity, not just profit margins. Your focus on short-term gains over sustainable growth goes against everything I've tried to teach you. Perhaps my biggest failure was not seeing this sooner. We need to meet. There are things you don't know, decisions I've made that will impact the future of Harrison Technologies. Don't make me formalize this through the board. Your father, Thomas. I sat back in my chair, a smile playing at my lips. Thomas Harrison wasn't just worried about the company, he was preparing to take action. The question was, how could I use this to my advantage? I pulled up the company's shareholder registry on my computer. My 2% ownership was hidden behind a series of shell companies untraceable to me. But I wasn't the only one quietly buying shares. Several investment firms had been accumulating small positions over the past few months. Were they anticipating the same power struggle I was? A notification popped up on my screen, an email from my contact at the SEC. Another piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Tomorrow, I would take the biggest risk yet in my carefully orchestrated plan. Tomorrow, I would start the process of becoming Harrison Technologies' largest independent shareholder. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. For a moment, I saw my mother's face again. The same determination, the same hint of sadness around the eyes. I'm doing this for both of us, Mom, I whispered. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I wondered if that was really true. Was I doing this for my mother's memory, for my own sense of justice, or for something else entirely? The answer, I suspected, would become clear soon enough. The next few weeks would test everything I worked for. My father thought he was untouchable, thought he could dismiss people from his life without consequences. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I closed my eyes, already planning my next move. Tomorrow would be another night of cleaning offices, gathering information, and quietly building my case. But soon, very soon, Beth the cleaner would disappear, and Elizabeth Harrison would finally take her place at the company that should have been her birthright. The game was changing, and I was the only player who knew all the rules. The morning headlines hit like a bombshell. Harrison Technologies faces hostile takeover attempt. I smiled as I read the article on my tablet, knowing I had orchestrated every word. The 15% ownership stake I quietly accumulated through various shell companies had finally been revealed, sending shockwaves through the corporate world. My father's reaction was exactly what I'd expected. Within hours, Harrison Technologies issued a statement denouncing the opportunistic attempt to destabilize a great American company. Alexander Harrison, ever the showman, scheduled a press conference for that afternoon. I watched it from my apartment, still in my cleaner's uniform after finishing my morning shift. This company was built by my father, he declared, his voice carrying that familiar authoritative tone. And I will not let unnamed investors tear apart his legacy. If only he knew that legacy was exactly what I was fighting for. The past 3 weeks since discovering my grandfather's letter had been a whirlwind of calculated moves. I'd liquidated every asset I owned, called in every favor, and leveraged contacts from my investment banking days to amass the capital needed for this play. The 2% stake I'd started with had been just the beginning. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, my old colleague from Goldman Sachs, who'd helped arrange the share purchases. Board's calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. Your timing is perfect. Perfect timing wasn't luck. It was the result of 3 years of meticulous planning. I'd watched Alexander Harrison run this company like his personal kingdom, making decisions that benefited him while ignoring long-term consequences. The acquisition he'd been planning would have gutted the company's R&D department, sacrificing innovation for quick profits. Just like my grandfather's letter had suggested, Alexander cared more about short-term gains than sustainable growth. I changed out of my cleaner's uniform and into a carefully chosen outfit, a charcoal gray suit that cost more than Beth the cleaner made in 3 months. Tonight would be my last shift at Harrison Technologies, though no one knew that yet. I had one final task to complete before revealing myself. The night shift started as usual. Jerry barely looked up from his newspaper as I wheeled my cleaning cart toward the elevator. But tonight, instead of heading straight to the executive floor, I made my way to the IT department on the 3rd floor. "Evening, Beth," called out Mike, the night shift IT tech. Like Jerry, he'd grown used to my presence over the years. Unlike Jerry, he'd actually been helpful, unknowingly providing valuable information about the company's network security. "Hi, Mike," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Server room needs cleaning tonight. Mr. Harrison's orders." Mike frowned. "Really? Nobody told me about that." I shrugged, pulling out a work order I forged. "Just following the schedule." He glanced at the paper and nodded. "All right, but be careful in there. Don't touch anything that looks important." If only he knew what I was really after. Inside the server room, I quickly located what I needed: the backup drives containing board meeting recordings from the past 5 years. My father, ever paranoid about leaks, insisted on recording every meeting. Those recordings had captured countless instances of his questionable decision-making, including discussions about burying negative product reviews and sidestepping regulatory requirements. I slipped the drives into a hidden compartment in my cleaning cart, replacing them with identical ones that contained nothing but static. By the time anyone discovered the switch, it would be too late. As I finished my rounds, I took one last look at my father's office. The space that had once intimidated me now seemed smaller, less impressive. The vintage sailing photos, the rare books, the elaborate desk, all of it spoke to a man more concerned with appearances than substance. "Goodbye, Beth," Jerry called out as I left for the last time. "See you tomorrow." "Goodbye, Jerry," I replied softly, knowing I'd never see him again. Back home, I carefully added the stolen drives to my evidence wall. Tomorrow, everything would change. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., and I had no intention of missing it. I spent the night reviewing my presentation, making sure every detail was perfect. The hostile takeover attempt was just the opening move. Once the board saw the evidence I'd gathered, the financial mismanagement, the ethical breaches, the pattern of decisions that put personal profit above company interests, they would understand why Alexander Harrison needed to be removed. Morning came too quickly and not quickly enough. I dressed carefully in a tailored black suit, my mother's sapphire pendant around my neck. The pendant was the only piece of jewelry she kept from her time with Alexander, a gift from him during their brief relationship. She'd given it to me on my 21st birthday, saying, "Remember who you are, not just whose you are." The Harrison Technologies lobby felt different as I walked through the main entrance instead of the service entrance. A security guard at the desk didn't recognize me without my cleaner's uniform. "May I help you?" I handed him my ID, my real ID. Elizabeth Harrison for the board meeting. His eyes widened slightly at the name, but he quickly composed himself and made a call. Within minutes, I was being escorted to the boardroom on the top floor. The room fell silent as I entered. 12 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me, but I only cared about 2. My father, standing at the head of the table, looked confused and irritated by the interruption. And my grandfather, Thomas Harrison, sitting in his wheelchair by the window, studied me with an intensity that suggested he already knew who I was. "Who are you?" Alexander demanded. "This is a private meeting." I smiled, feeling oddly calm. "My name is Elizabeth Harrison. I represent the investment group that now owns 15% of this company." I paused, letting that sink in before adding, "I'm also your daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander's face went pale, then red. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "Security." "I wouldn't do that," I said, pulling out a USB drive. "Not before the board sees what's on here." Thomas Harrison held up a hand, stopping the security guard who had started toward me. "Let her speak." For the next hour, I laid out my case. The financial records showing Alexander's mismanagement, the evidence of ethical breaches, the pattern of decisions that had weakened the company's competitive position. With each revelation, I could see the board members' expressions shifting from skepticism to concern to outrage. "This is a fabrication," Alexander interrupted, his voice shaking. "She's trying to destroy everything we've built." "No," I said firmly. "I'm trying to save it. I've spent the last 3 years learning this company from the ground up, watching you run it into the ground. I worked as a cleaner, coming in every night, seeing how things really operated when you thought no one was watching." Thomas Harrison wheeled himself forward, his eyes never leaving my face. "Sarah's daughter," he said quietly. "I wondered if you'd ever find your way here." Alexander's head snapped toward his father. "You knew?" "I knew about Sarah's pregnancy," Thomas replied. "I tried to convince you to do the right thing back then. You refused." He turned back to me. "Continue, please." I outlined my plan for the company, returning to the principles of innovation and integrity that Thomas had built it on, investing in R&D, and developing sustainable growth strategies. As I spoke, I could see the board members nodding, some taking notes, others whispering among themselves. "This is absurd," Alexander cut in again. "You can't seriously be considering." "We're not just considering it," Thomas interrupted. "We're voting on it." Now, what followed was the longest 30 minutes of my life. The board voted to suspend Alexander pending a full investigation of my allegations. Thomas Harrison was reinstated as interim CEO, with me appointed as Chief Strategy Officer. As the board members filed out, Alexander remained frozen in his chair, staring at me with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why come back after all these years?" I met his gaze steadily. "Because this company deserves better than what you've given it. Because the daughter you dismissed might be the only one who can save your father's legacy. I built this company into what it is today," he protested. "No," Thomas said firmly. "You inherited a great company and nearly drove it into the ground. Elizabeth has shown more understanding of what Harrison Technology should be than you ever did." As I turned to leave, Alexander called out, "You think this makes us family? You think this changes anything?" I paused at the door. "No, it doesn't make us family, but it does make me your boss." The look on his face as I walked out was something I'd remember for a long time. In the hallway, Thomas gestured for me to follow him to his private office. Once inside, he pulled out an old photograph from his desk drawer, a picture of my mother holding me as a baby. "I kept track of you over the years," he said softly. "Your achievements, your education. I should have done more." "Why didn't you?" I asked, the question I'd wondered about for years finally coming out. He sighed heavily. "Pride, perhaps, or cowardice. I let Alexander's mistakes become my own." He looked up at me, his eyes clear and determined. "But we can fix that now, if you're willing." I studied the man who was both stranger and family. "I didn't come here looking for a grandfather," I said carefully. "No," he smiled. "You came here to take control of a billion-dollar company, and you did it brilliantly." He wheeled himself to the window, looking out over the city. "But maybe, while we're rebuilding this company, we can rebuild something else too." I joined him at the window, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The little girl who grew up without a father. The young woman who turned rejection into determination. The cleaner who became the boss. "Maybe we can," I said softly. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the office. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Restructuring the company, implementing my plans, dealing with the fallout from Alexander's suspension. But for now, standing next to my grandfather, watching the day end from an office I'd once cleaned, I felt a sense of peace. The game wasn't over, but the rules had changed, and this time, I wasn't playing from the shadows. 1 month after taking control of Harrison Technologies, I sat in what had once been Alexander's office, reviewing the latest financial reports. The vintage sailing photos were gone, replaced by charts tracking our new R&D initiatives. The pretentious rare books had given way to actual technical manuals and industry analyses, This wasn't just an office anymore. It was a command center for rebuilding the company. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Board meeting in 20 minutes. Alexander's appealing his suspension. I wasn't surprised. My father had spent the past month building his case, claiming I had obtained information illegally during my time as a cleaner. He'd hired the best lawyers money could buy. Though that money was quickly running out, the board had frozen most of his assets pending the investigation. Ready? Thomas asked, wheeling himself into my office. Despite his declining health, he'd been an invaluable ally during the transition, helping me navigate the complex relationships within the company. Always, I replied, gathering my files. How many board members is he trying to sway? 3, Thomas said grimly. Morton, Chen, and Davis. They're old friends of his, worried about their own positions if all his decisions come under scrutiny. I nodded, having expected this. Then it's time to show them what I found in the server room backups. The boardroom looked exactly as it had a month ago when I'd revealed my identity, but the dynamics had shifted dramatically. Where once I'd been the outsider forcing my way in, now I sat at the head of the table, Thomas at my right hand. Alexander and his lawyers sat at the far end, like supplicants before a court. Mr. Harrison has prepared a statement, his lawyer began, but I held up my hand. Before we hear any statements, I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd learned from years of watching my father, I'd like to share some new information with the board. I nodded to my assistant, who distributed folders to each board member. These transcripts come from board meeting recordings dating back 5 years. Pay particular attention to the highlighted sections. The room fell silent as they read. I watched their faces change as they discovered the extent of Alexander's manipulation. The backdated contracts, the buried safety reports, the systematic dismantling of the quality control processes my grandfather had put in place. This is illegal surveillance, Alexander's lawyer protested. These recordings were made on your client's own orders. I interrupted. Every board meeting for the past 5 years, recorded and archived. Company policy, isn't that right, Dad? Alexander's face had gone pale. He knew what those recordings contained. Every unethical decision, every manipulation, every time he put his own interests above the company's. Morton, I said, addressing one of his allies directly, pay special attention to the discussion about the pension fund investments. Notice how your name comes up. Morton's hands trembled as he read the relevant section. The other board members leaned over to look, and I could see the moment they understood. Alexander hadn't just betrayed the company. He implicated many of them in his schemes. This is a witch hunt, Alexander said, standing up. You're trying to destroy everything I built. You built? Thomas's voice cut through the room like steel. You inherited this company when it was at its peak. You inherited a legacy of innovation, of integrity. And what did you do with it? I made us profitable, Alexander shot back. I kept us competitive. You made yourself profitable, I corrected, pulling out another document. This analysis shows the correlation between company decisions and your personal stock trades. Notice how you always seem to sell before bad news went public, or buy before positive announcements. The lawyer whispered something urgently in Alexander's ear, but he brushed him off. You're just like your mother, he spat. She tried to trap me too, showing up with her pregnancy test and her dreams of playing happy family. The room fell silent. I stood slowly, letting his words hang in the air. My mother never tracked you. She loved you, believed in you. Her mistake was thinking you were capable of loving anything other than power and money. And what do you love? He demanded. You infiltrated this company, spied on us, manipulated your way into control. I love what this company could be, I said firmly. What it was meant to be. I spent 3 years cleaning these offices, watching talented people being held back by your ego. I saw innovations buried because they didn't fit your short-term profit goals. I watched you slowly kill everything my grandfather built. Our grandfather, he corrected bitterly. No, Thomas said quietly. She earned the right to call me that. You lost it. The board voted unanimously to make Alexander's suspension permanent. His allies, seeing the evidence of his manipulation, turned on him to save themselves. As security escorted him out, he turned to me one last time. You think you've won? He asked, his voice breaking. You think you can run this company better than I did? I met his gaze steadily. I already am. The next few hours were a blur of paperwork and preparations. The press would need to be notified, statements prepared, markets managed. But before all that, I had one more task to complete. I went down to the lobby where Jerry was just starting his night shift. He looked up in surprise as I approached his desk. "Ms. Harrison," he said uncertainly. I guess you were Beth?" "I don't." I smiled, holding out an envelope. "Thank you, Jerry, for being kind to the cleaning woman who never existed." Inside the envelope was a promotion letter. Head of Building Security reporting directly to me. His eyes widened as he read it. "I don't understand," he said. "Why?" "Because you treated everyone with respect, regardless of their position. That's the kind of person we need here." Next, I visited Mike and it. He got a promotion too, along with funding for the security upgrades he'd been requesting for years. One by one, I sought out the people who'd shown kindness to Beth the cleaner, who'd done their jobs with integrity even when management didn't care. That evening, as the sun set over the city, I found myself back in my old cleaning closet. My cart was still there, though someone else would be using it now. I ran my hand along the handle, remembering all the nights I pushed it through these halls, gathering information, building my case, preparing for this moment. Having second thoughts, Thomas asked from the doorway. I turned to face him, smiling. No, just remembering where I started. He wheeled himself closer, looking thoughtfully at the cleaning supplies. I've been thinking about what you said in the board meeting, about what this company could be. And I think you're already making it happen." He pulled out an old photograph. Not the one of my mother this time, but one I'd never seen before. It showed him as a young man, standing in front of a tiny storefront with a hand-painted sign, Harrison Electronics. "I started with nothing," he said softly, "built it all from scratch. Your father never understood that part. He was born into success, never had to fight for it." "Like me," I pointed out. He shook his head. "No, you fought harder than anyone. You could have come in with lawyers and demands, tried to claim your birthright through the courts. Instead, you learned this company from the ground up. You earned every bit of it." I felt tears threatening but held them back. "I'm not finished earning it." "No," he agreed, "but you've made one hell of a start." The next morning, I arrived early to find a line of reporters outside the building. News of Alexander's permanent removal had leaked, and everyone wanted the story. I straightened my jacket, touched my mother's pendant for luck, and stepped out of my car. "Ms. Harrison," they called out, "is it true you worked as a cleaner here? Did you really spy on your own father? What are your plans for the company?" I paused at the top of the steps, thinking about everything that had brought me to this moment. The little girl who grew up without a father. The woman who spent years planning her revenge. The cleaner who became CEO. Harrison Technologies is entering a new era, I said clearly. We're returning to our roots of innovation and integrity, while moving forward into the future. As for working as a cleaner, yes, I did. Because sometimes the only way to really understand a company is to see it from the ground up. Later that day, I received a package. Inside was a frame containing my old cleaning uniform, with a note from Thomas. "Never forget where you started. It's what makes you different from him." I hung it on my office wall, right where Alexander's sailing photos used to be. A reminder that success isn't about what you're given, but what you're willing to work for. That evening, as I worked late in my office, I caught a glimpse of the night cleaning crew starting their rounds. They moved differently now, heads held higher, more confident. Word had spread about my story, and suddenly the invisible workers weren't so invisible anymore. I touched my mother's pendant, wishing she could see what I'd accomplished. She'd always told me that revenge wasn't the answer, that it would consume me if I let it. But this didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like justice, like restoration. My phone buzzed. A message from Alexander's lawyer. He wanted to meet, to discuss terms. I deleted it without responding. There was nothing left to discuss. The past was the past, and I had a company to run. As night fell over the city, I stood at my office window, looking out at the lights below. Somewhere out there, my father was probably plotting his next move, trying to figure out how to regain what he'd lost. But he'd never understand what he'd really lost. Not the company, not the power, but the chance to know his daughter. His loss, I decided. I had work to do. The cleaning cart still sat in my old closet, a reminder of where this all began, but now it was just that, a reminder. The game was over, and I had won. Not just for myself, but for my mother, for my grandfather, and for every person who'd ever been underestimated or overlooked. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply becoming everything they said you couldn't be. I am Elizabeth Harrison, daughter of Alexander Harrison, granddaughter of Thomas Harrison. But more importantly, I am the woman who cleaned offices at night and became CEO by day. I am the proof that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. And I'm just getting started. The last rose petal had barely settled on Mom's grave when Marcus showed his true colors. I stood on our front porch, no, his front porch now, according to him, staring at the shiny new locks he'd installed while I was at the cemetery. "This house is mine now," he said, leaning against the doorframe with a smirk that made my stomach turn. "Your mother left everything to me. Time for you to find your own place, Emma." I clutched my house key, now useless, so hard it left marks in my palm. "Mom wouldn't have wanted this, Marcus. You know that. What your mother wanted doesn't matter anymore." He straightened his expensive tie, bought with Mom's money like everything else he owned. "She's gone, and you're not my responsibility. You have an hour to pack what you can carry." I stared at the man my mother had married 3 years ago, trying to see what she'd seen in him. The charming businessman who'd swept her off her feet after Dad died, who'd promised to take care of us both. Now, with Mom gone, the mask had completely dropped. "My clothes are in there," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "My laptop, my photos of Mom." "Should have thought about that before you accused me of stealing your mother's medication, shouldn't you?" His voice was cold. "Actions have consequences, Emma. You're 23. Time to learn that lesson." The accusation had been true, of course. I caught him selling Mom's prescription pain medication during her final months, pocketing the money while she suffered. But when I tried to tell her, he convinced her I was jealous, unstable, trying to come between them. She'd been too weak, too medicated by then to see through his lies. "Fine," I said, straightening my shoulders. "Give me my hour." He stepped aside, gesturing mockingly for me to enter. The house I'd grown up in, where Mom and Dad had raised me, felt foreign now. Marcus had already started changing things, moving Mom's beloved artwork into the garage, replacing family photos with his tacky modern prints. I headed straight for my room, grabbing my backpack and the duffel bag from under my bed. What do you pack when your life is being erased? I took what clothes I could fit, my journal, the photo album I kept hidden in my closet. My hands shook as I grabbed Mom's old silver locket from my jewelry box, the one she'd given me the week before she died. "Keep this safe," she'd whispered, pressing it into my palm. "And remember, sweetheart, things aren't always what they seem." At the time, I thought it was just the medication talking. Now, looking at the delicate engravings on the silver surface, I wondered if there had been more to her words. 30 minutes, Marcus called up the stairs, his voice laced with satisfaction. I moved faster, grabbing my laptop charger and the small box of photos from under my bed. My eyes fell on the painting above my desk, a watercolor of our old lake house that Mom had done years ago. I reached for it, but Marcus appeared in the doorway. "The artwork stays," he said firmly. "Your mother's art collection is quite valuable. That's not going anywhere." I bit back a retort. Mom had painted that specifically for me on my 16th birthday. It wasn't part of her collection, it was a gift. But arguing with Marcus was pointless. I'd learned that lesson the hard way over the past 3 years. As I finished packing, my phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, Lucy. "Done at the cemetery. Want me to come over?" I typed back quickly, SOS. Marcus changed locks. "Kicking me out. Can I crash at your place?" Her response was immediate. "On my way. Don't let that bastard intimidate you." I shouldered my bags and took one last look around my room. The pale blue walls Mom and I had painted together, the window seat where I'd spent countless hours reading, the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling from my astronomy phase in middle school. All of it about to become part of Marcus's property, like everything else he'd taken from us. Downstairs, Marcus was on the phone, probably with one of his sketchy business associates. "Yes, we can meet tomorrow. The house will be empty. Well, emptier." He laughed at his own joke, shooting me a smug look. I walked past him without a word, but he grabbed my arm. "One more thing," he said, covering the phone's mouthpiece. "Don't get any ideas about contesting anything. Your mother's will is ironclad. I made sure of that." I pulled away from his grip. "Goodbye, Marcus. Outside, Lucy's beat-up Honda was just pulling into the driveway. She jumped out, her dark eyes flashing with anger when she saw my bags. He's really doing this? The day after the funeral? She moved to help me with my duffel bag. We should call the police. And tell them what? That my stepdad is legally evicting me from his house. I shook my head. Mom left everything to him, Luce. He's made that very clear. It's not right, she insisted, glaring at the house. Your mom would never have wanted this. No, I agreed quietly. She wouldn't have. But she also wouldn't have wanted him stealing her medication or emptying her bank accounts while she was dying. Sometimes people aren't who we think they are. As we drove away, I watched my childhood home disappear in a side mirror. The rose bushes Mom had lovingly tended were already wilting. Marcus would probably tear them out soon, replace them with something more modern. Lucy squeezed my hand. You can stay with me as long as you need. My mom already said it's fine. Thanks, Luce. I managed a small smile. I just need a few days to figure things out. But what was there to figure out? I had a decent job at the local library, but not enough saved for an apartment. Most of my savings had gone to helping with Mom's medical bills that mysteriously kept growing despite our insurance. Now I knew why. We stopped at a traffic light, and I found myself absently fingering Mom's locket. Something about its weight felt off, like it was heavier than it should be. I'd never actually opened it. Mom had been insistent about keeping it closed until the right time. What's that? Lucy asked, noticing my distraction. Mom's locket. She gave it to me right before. I swallowed hard. Right before she died. Made me promise to keep it safe. Lucy glanced at it curiously. Pretty. Looks old. It was her grandmother's, I think. I turned it over in my hands, studying the intricate engravings. That's when I noticed something strange. A tiny seam that didn't quite match the rest of the pattern. Luce, I said slowly, can we stop somewhere? I need to look at something. She pulled into the parking lot of a small coffee shop we used to frequent with Mom. My hands trembled slightly as I examined the locket more closely. The seam definitely looked intentional, like there was more to the locket than the usual photo compartment. Maybe there's a hidden catch? Lucy suggested, watching me turn it over and over. I pressed different parts of the design, trying to remember if Mom had ever mentioned anything special about the locket. Then I recalled her words. Things aren't always what they seem. The rose engraving in the center, when I pressed it just right, there was a soft click. The back panel of the locket slid open, revealing not photos, but a small folded piece of paper and what looked like a key. Holy shit, Lucy breathed, leaning closer. Your mom left you a secret message. My heart pounding, I carefully unfolded the paper. Mom's familiar handwriting filled the small space. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then my fears about Marcus were justified. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have listened to you sooner, but I've made arrangements to protect you, arrangements Marcus knows nothing about. The key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank, box number 247. Go there immediately. Ask for Patricia Winters. She's an old friend and she's expecting you. What you find in that box will change everything. I love you more than life itself. Stay strong. Justice is coming. Love, Mom. I stared at the letter, then at the key, my mind racing. Mom knew, I whispered. She knew what Marcus was really like. She was planning something. Lucy was already putting the car in gear. First National is still open for another hour. Want to find out what's in that box? I clutched the letter and key tightly. Yes, I do. As we drove toward the bank, I thought about all the little things that hadn't quite added up in Mom's final months. The whispered phone calls. The mysterious appointments she wouldn't explain. The way she'd insisted on keeping her old laptop even when Marcus offered to buy her a new one. Mom had always taught me that the truth finds its way out eventually. What truth had she been protecting? What had she hidden away in that safety deposit box that was worth all this secrecy? Lucy parked in front of the bank just as the sun was starting to set. Whatever's in that box, she said, squeezing my hand, I'm right here with you. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. Let's go find out what Mom's justice looks like. The bank lobby was nearly empty as we approached the main desk. An older woman looked up from her computer, her eyes sharpening with interest when I asked for Patricia Winters. And you are? Emma Mitchell, Margaret Mitchell's daughter. The woman's entire demeanor changed. Of course. We've been expecting you. Follow me, please. As we walked toward the safety deposit box area, I could feel my heart pounding. Whatever Mom had left in that box, it was important enough to keep secret from Marcus, important enough to protect with all these precautions. Patricia Winters was waiting for us in a private viewing room, a slender woman in her 50s with kind eyes and Mom's favorite shade of lipstick. "Emma," she said warmly, "you look so much like your mother. I've been hoping you'd find your way here soon." "You knew my mom. We were friends in college and I helped her with some legal matters in recent months." Patricia's expression turned serious. She wanted to make absolutely sure you'd be taken care of, no matter what happened. She gestured to a table where a large safety deposit box waited. "Shall we see what Margaret left for you?" I held out the key with trembling fingers. Whatever was in that box, I knew one thing for certain. Mom had outplayed Marcus one last time, and I was about to find out how. The safety deposit box opened with a soft click that seemed to echo in the quiet room. Patricia stepped back, giving me space as I lifted the lid with trembling hands. Inside was a thick manila envelope, a laptop I recognized as Mom's old one, and a smaller box that looked like it held a USB drive. But what caught my eye first was a letter on top, marked "Read this first" in Mom's handwriting. Lucy squeezed my shoulder as I opened it. "Dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then everything has happened as I feared it might. Marcus has shown his true colors, and you're probably feeling lost and betrayed. Don't be. I've been preparing for this moment for months. What you're about to learn will change everything." The laptop contains proof of all of Marcus's crimes, not just stealing my medication, but years of fraud, money laundering, and theft. The USB drive has backup copies of everything, plus recordings of conversations I had with him when he thought I was too medicated to remember. But the most important thing is in the manila envelope. My real will, witnessed and notarized 6 months ago, before Marcus could interfere. Everything I own, the house, my art collection, my investments, it all goes to you, Emma. Marcus's ironclad will is a forgery. My hands shook as I opened the manila envelope. Inside were dozens of documents, bank statements, property deeds, and Mom's true will, exactly as she described. But there was more. "Your mother was very thorough," Patricia said softly. "She knew Marcus would try something like this. That's why she came to me, not just as her friend, but as a forensic accountant." I looked up sharply. "Forensic accountant?" Patricia nodded. "I've spent the last 6 months helping your mother document everything. Marcus thought you was so clever, hiding money in offshore accounts, selling her medication, forging documents. But he didn't know who he was dealing with." Lucy whistled low as she looked over my shoulder at the documents. "Holy shit, Emma. Your mom was a genius." She was right. Page after page showed exactly how Marcus had been stealing from Mom for years, long before she got sick. Bank transfers, forged signatures, suspicious insurance policies, it was all there, meticulously documented. "There's something else," Patricia said, reaching for the small box with the USB drive. "Your mother made a video statement. Would you like to see it?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Patricia inserted the drive into a laptop she had ready, and suddenly Mom's face filled the screen. She looked tired but clear-eyed, obviously recorded during one of her better days. "Emma, my darling girl," she began, and I felt tears start at the sound of her voice. "By now you know the truth about Marcus. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you sooner when you tried to warn me. But I promise you, I made it right." She explained everything. How she first suspected Marcus was stealing from her. How she pretended to be more affected by the medication and she was to catch him in the act. How she worked with Patricia to document every crime. The art collection he's so eager to get his hands on. Mom smiled her old mischievous smile. "Most of those paintings are actually high-quality forgeries. I sold the originals months ago and put the money in a trust for you. The real paintings are in a secure storage facility." Patricia has all the details. I couldn't help but laugh through my tears. Even at the end, Mom had been 3 steps ahead of Marcus. "But the most important thing," Mom continued, her expression growing serious, "is that you understand why I did all this. Not just to protect our assets, but to protect you from him. Marcus is dangerous, Emma, not just greedy, but vindictive. That's why we had to let him think he won." Patricia paused the video. "Your mother left very specific instructions about what happens next. Are you ready to hear them? I squared my shoulders, feeling stronger than I had in months. Yes. Tell me everything. The plan, it turned out, was elegant in its simplicity. Right now, Marcus thought he had everything. The house, the art, the bank accounts. He had no idea that Mom's real will had already been filed with a court, or that copies of all his crimes had been sent to the FBI's white-collar crime division. We wait until tomorrow morning, Patricia explained. He'll be meeting with the estate lawyer, my colleague David Harrison, expecting to take formal possession of everything. That's when we spring the trap. Lucy grinned. Please tell me I can be there to see his face. I spent that night at Lucy's house, barely sleeping as I went through all the documents Mom had left. The more I read, the more amazed I was at her foresight. She thought of everything, protected everything, all while fighting cancer and dealing with Marcus's abuse. The next morning, I dressed carefully in Mom's favorite blazer, which I'd thankfully grabbed during my rushed packing. Lucy drove me to the lawyer's office, where Patricia was waiting outside. Ready? She asked. I touched Mom's locket, still hanging around my neck. Ready. Marcus was already in the conference room, lounging in a leather chair like he owned it. His smug smile faltered slightly when he saw me walk in with Patricia. What is she doing here? He demanded. Ms. Mitchell is here because this concerns her, David Harrison said smoothly. Shall we begin? This won't take long, Marcus said, shooting me a cold look. The will is very clear. Everything goes to me. Ah yes, about that will. Harrison opened a folder. It seems we have a problem. You see, we have another will filed 6 months ago. And this one, he slid it across the table, is the legal one. Marcus's face went pale as he scanned the document. This is impossible. Margaret changed her will. I saw her do it. You saw her sign a will you pressured her to create while she was heavily medicated, Patricia corrected. A will that, by the way, has already been proven to be forged. The FBI is very interested in discussing that with you. The FBI? Marcus laughed, but I could see sweat breaking out on his forehead. This is ridiculous. You can't prove anything. I pulled out Mom's laptop and the USB drive. Actually, we can prove everything. The medication you stole and sold. The money you laundered through fake companies. The art you tried to sell behind Mom's back. She documented all of it. You're bluffing, he snarled, but his hands were shaking. Margaret was many things, Patricia said quietly, but she wasn't stupid. She knew exactly who you were, Marcus. She just made sure you wouldn't know who she was until it was too late. As if on cue, 2 men in suits entered the conference room, showing FBI badges. Marcus Thompson, we need you to come with us. What happened next was almost anticlimactic. Marcus tried to run, made it as far as the elevator before the agents caught him. He was still screaming threats as they led him away in handcuffs. Your mother would have enjoyed that, Patricia said, smiling as we watched from the window. She orchestrated it perfectly, I agreed. Even from beyond the grave, she made sure justice was served. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and revelations. The FBI found even more evidence of Marcus's crimes than Mom had documented. More victims came forward. Other widows he tried to scam, businesses he defrauded. He was looking at serious prison time. I moved back into our house, my house now, and slowly began restoring it to the way Mom had kept it. Her real art collection came out of storage, each piece more beautiful than I remembered. The rose bushes in the garden started blooming again with a little care. One evening, about a month after everything had happened, Lucy and Patricia came over for dinner. We sat in the garden, surrounded by Mom's beloved roses, sharing stories and memories. You know what I keep thinking about, Lucy said, sipping her wine. How different things would have been if your mom hadn't given you that locket, if she hadn't trusted you to figure it all out. She knew I would, I said softly. She always said I was smarter than I gave myself credit for. Patricia smiled. She talked about you constantly during those last months, said you were the only one who saw through Marcus from the beginning. She was so proud of you, Emma. I touched the locket, still hanging around my neck. I wish she could have seen justice served herself. Oh, but she did, Patricia said. She orchestrated every moment of it. She made sure Marcus would feel completely secure before she pulled the rug out from under him. That was her final gift to you, not just the inheritance, but the satisfaction of seeing him face consequences for his actions. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in Mom's old study. My study now, looking through her things. In a drawer, I found a photo I'd never seen before. Mom and me at the lake house, both of us laughing as we tried to paint the sunset. On the back, she'd written, "Remember, Emma, strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise after the fall. You, my darling, have always known how to rise." I placed the photo on my desk, next to the painting of the lake house I'd managed to rescue from Marcus's garage. Mom had been right. Justice had come, in its own time and in its own way. She'd made sure of that, protecting me one last time, while teaching me to protect myself. The roses in the garden were blooming more beautifully than ever now, their scent drifting in through the open window. Like Mom always said, the most beautiful flowers often grow from the hardest soil. You just have to be patient enough to wait for them to bloom. Marcus would spend years in prison, his crimes finally exposed to the world. The money he'd stolen was recovered, the people he'd hurt would see justice served. And I had not just my inheritance, but something far more valuable, the knowledge that my mother had been even stronger and smarter than I'd known. In the end, Mom had turned Marcus's greatest weapons, his greed and arrogance, against him. She let him think he was winning while she quietly built an insurmountable case against him. She protected not just me, but everyone else he might have hurt in the future. That night, I added my own note to the back of the photo. "Thank you, Mom, for teaching me that the greatest strength often comes disguised as patience, and that justice, like your roses, blooms in its own perfect time." The house was quiet now, but it no longer felt empty. Every room held memories of Mom, not just in her things, but in the legacy of strength and wisdom she'd left behind. Marcus had tried to take everything from us, but in the end, he'd lost everything himself. And somewhere I knew Mom was smiling that knowing smile of hers, satisfied that justice had finally bloomed like her beloved roses, slow to grow, perhaps, but beautiful in its time. When my father died 7 years ago, he left behind 3 things: a vintage car collection he'd spent his life building, a beautiful lakefront property that had been in his family for generations, and a daughter who missed him more than words could express. That's me, Diana, and this is the story of how my own family tried to steal my inheritance right from under me. Dad was a master mechanic, the kind who could diagnose an engine problem just by listening. His garage was his sanctuary, filled with tools that felt like extensions of his hands and cars he'd lovingly restored over decades. Every weekend, he'd be out there tinkering with one vehicle or another, teaching me everything he knew. "Pay attention, princess," he'd say, gesturing for me to look closer at whatever he was working on. "Someday all this will be yours, and you'll need to know how to take care of it." I spent countless hours in that garage, learning about carburetors and timing belts, the difference between a flathead and a Phillips screwdriver, and most importantly, the value of patience and attention to detail. While other girls my age were playing with dolls, I was helping Dad restore a 1967 Mustang. My small hands perfect for reaching into tight spaces. Mom never understood our bond or our shared passion for cars. She was more interested in social status, in keeping up appearances. When Dad died of a sudden heart attack at 52, she waited exactly 11 months before marrying Stephen, her tennis instructor who was nearly 15 years her junior. I was 16 when Stephen moved in, bringing with him his 13-year-old daughter Amber from his first marriage. Suddenly, our quiet home became a different place entirely. Stephen and Mom spent money like water, buying new furniture, redecorating every room, trying to erase all traces of Dad's presence. The only places they didn't touch were the garage and a lake house. The garage because it's full of junk anyway, Mom's words, and the lake house because Dad's will had specific provisions about it. Or so I thought. "You can't sell any of it until Diana turns 25, I overheard our family lawyer, Mr. Patterson, telling Mom shortly after Dad's funeral. James was very clear about that. I took comfort in knowing Dad had protected his legacy, had ensured that the things he loved would be preserved for me. I should have known better. I should have gotten copies of all the documents myself, should have paid more attention to the legal details instead of just trusting that everything would be handled properly. But I was 16 and grieving, more concerned with keeping Dad's cars running than with paperwork and legal provisions. Every afternoon after school, I'd head straight to the garage, working on the cars just like he taught me. It was my way of keeping him close, of honoring his memory. Meanwhile, Mom and Steven threw themselves into transforming Amber from a quiet, bookish girl into their idea of the perfect daughter. Designer clothes, private tennis lessons, cotillion classes, nothing was too expensive when it came to Amber's development. "Diana, honey," Mom would say, eyeing my oil-stained jeans with disapproval. "Would you rather join Amber at her etiquette classes? It would be so much more appropriate than spending all your time in that garage." But I stayed true to what Dad had taught me. I kept his cars running, kept his tools organized just the way he liked them. The other kids at school thought it was weird, a girl spending so much time working on old cars. But I didn't care. Every time I got one of Dad's classics purring like new, I felt like he was right there with me, nodding in approval. After high school, I went to college for mechanical engineering, paying my way by working at a local auto shop. Mom and Steven didn't offer to help with tuition. All their money was going toward Amber's future. I didn't mind. I was good at what I did, and the shop owner, Mike, appreciated having someone who understood vintage cars. "You've got the touch, kid," he'd say, watching me work. "Just like your old man." I came home as often as I could, mainly to check on the cars and visit the lake house. Each time, I noticed small changes. Tools missing from the garage, parts that had been there before suddenly gone. When I asked Mom about it, she'd wave off my concerns. "Oh, we needed to clear some space," she'd say vaguely. "You can't expect us to keep everything exactly the same forever, Diana." I should have pressed harder, should have demanded answers. But I was busy with school, with work, with trying to build my own life. And honestly, I still couldn't imagine that my own mother would go against Dad's wishes. Then came the day that changed everything. I was in my final semester of college when Mom called, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Diana, you'll never believe it. Amber's engaged. To Bradley Worthington Aita, you know, the Worthingtons of Worthington Investments." I made appropriate congratulatory noises while mentally calculating how long it would be before I could politely end the call. But Mom wasn't finished. "We're planning the most amazing wedding. The country club, a 10-piece orchestra, 500 guests. Of course, it's going to be quite expensive, but Steven and I have figured out how to manage it." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. "Mom, what do you mean you figured it out?" "Well," she paused, and I could picture her practicing her most persuasive smile. "We've had some interest in the lake property, and since it's just sitting there empty most of the time." "You can't sell the lake house," I cut in. "Dad's will." "Oh, that old thing." Steven had his lawyer look it over. Apparently, there was some problem with how it was filed. Something about improper witnesses or incorrect paperwork. The point is, as James's widow, I have every right to sell it. And really, Diana, it's for the best. Amber needs this wedding to secure her future. Your father would have understood. The world seemed to tilt sideways. "Mom, no. You can't. That property has been in Dad's family for generations. He wanted me to have it." "Don't be selfish, Diana. Amber is your sister now, and this is her big moment." Besides, her voice took on that dismissive tone I'd grown to hate. "What would you do with a lake house anyway? You're always covered in grease, playing with those old cars. This way, at least the property will serve a useful purpose." I hung up without responding, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Dad's voice echoed in my head. "Someday all this will be yours." I grabbed my laptop and started searching through old emails, looking for anything from Mr. Patterson, any documentation about Dad's will. That's when I discovered something else. The vintage cars. Dad's pride and joy, the collection he'd spent his life building. Many of them were missing from the insurance documents. I called Mike at the shop, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mike, I need a favor. Could you check something for me? Last time you were at my dad's garage, how many cars were there?" There was a long pause. "Diana, I was wondering when you'd ask about that. They've been selling them off, one by one. I tried to stop them, told them those cars were meant for you, but your stepdad said they had paperwork showing they had the right to sell." The room spun around me as Mike's words sank in. They'd been selling Dad's cars. His life's work, his legacy to me, and they'd been quietly disposing of it to fund their extravagant lifestyle and now Amber's wedding. I ended the call and sat in silence, staring at nothing. Then I opened my email and wrote 2 messages. The first was to my academic advisor asking for an emergency extension on my final projects. The second was to a lawyer I'd met at the auto shop, a classic car enthusiast who specialized in estate law. Need your help? I wrote. Family inheritance being sold without permission. How soon can we meet? The response came within minutes. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Bring any documentation you have. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dad in his garage, teaching me about timing belts and distributors, showing me how to diagnose engine problems by sound and feel. Pay attention, princess, he'd said. Someday all this will be yours. Well, Dad, I thought as I finally drifted off, I'm paying attention now, and I'm not letting them take what you meant for me to have. The law office of Marcus Bennett looked exactly like you'd expect. Leather chairs, dark wood paneling, and walls lined with legal texts. But there was something else too. Framed photos of classic cars, including a gorgeous 1965 Shelby Cobra that made my heart ache. It reminded me of the one Dad and I had been planning to restore together. That's my baby, Marcus said, following my gaze. Spent 3 years bringing her back to life. Your friend Mike tells me you know your way around engines? I nodded, still staring at the photo. My dad taught me everything I know, or at least he tried to before. I swallowed hard. Before they started selling off his collection. Marcus's friendly smile faded, replaced by a look of focused intensity. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. For the next hour, I walked him through it all. Dad's death, the will's provisions about waiting until I was 25, the gradual disappearance of the cars, and now their plan to sell the lake house for Amber's wedding. Do you have a copy of the will? He asked. I shook my head. Mom and Stephen said there were problems with how it was filed. Something about improper witnesses. Marcus frowned. That's concerning. Who was your father's lawyer? Mr. Patterson. But when I tried calling his office yesterday, they said he retired 2 years ago, moved to Florida. George Patterson. Marcus sat up straighter. I know George. He's meticulous about documentation. If he handled your father's will, there's no way there were problems with how it was filed. Hope flickered in my chest. Can you find out for sure? I can do better than that. He reached for his phone. George and I play golf whenever he's in town. Let me give him a call. 20 minutes later, Marcus had answers that made my blood boil. George never retired to Florida, he said grimly. He's been working part-time at his son's firm across town. And he definitely never told your mother there were problems with the will. In fact, he's been trying to reach you for months. Your mother told his office you were studying abroad and couldn't be contacted. My hands clenched into fists. They lied. About everything. It gets worse, Marcus continued. George says your father set up a trust, not just a will. The cars, the lake house, even the tools in the garage. They're all held in trust for you. Your mother and stepfather have no legal right to sell any of it. But they have been selling it, I said, my voice shaking. The cars, the tools. How many laws have they broken? Several. Marcus was already typing on his computer, selling property held in trust without authorization. That's fraud. Using the proceeds for personal benefit, more fraud. Making false statements about the trust's existence, you get the picture. What can we do? First, we need documentation. Records of what's been sold, when to whom for how much. Bank statements showing where the money went. Then we can file for an emergency injunction to stop the lake house sale and start proceedings to recover what's been taken. I thought about the missing cars, the empty spaces in Dad's garage. Can we get them back? Some maybe, others might be gone for good. But we can get financial compensation, possibly with punitive damages. He looked at me seriously. This won't be easy. They're family. Are you sure you want to pursue this? They stopped being family the moment they started stealing my inheritance, I said firmly. Dad trusted me to take care of his legacy. I won't let him down. The next few weeks were a blur of investigation and documentation. Marcus's team tracked down sales records for 11 of Dad's cars, worth over $800,000 combined. They found receipts for tools and equipment sold at various auctions. Most stunning of all, they discovered the money trail, deposits into Mom and Stephen's personal accounts, transfers to wedding vendors, payments for Amber's new car and luxury apartment. Meanwhile, I took a leave of absence from my final semester, promising my professors I'd make up the work over the summer. This was more important. This was about justice. I moved back home, watching Mom and Stephen's mounting panic as they realized they couldn't reach the lawyer who'd supposedly found problems with Dad's will. because he didn't exist. They'd forged documents, created a fake law firm's letterhead, all to convince me they had the right to sell my inheritance. Diana, sweetie, Mom cornered me in the kitchen one morning, her smile brittle. About the lake house. I know you're upset, but try to understand. Amber's wedding is so important. It's her chance at a perfect life. Like my life doesn't matter. I kept my voice neutral, recording every word on my phone. Like Dad's wishes don't matter. Your father would have wanted to help his stepdaughter, she insisted. He was generous that way. Really? I pulled out my phone, showing her a photo from my investigation. Is that why you sold his prized 1969 Chevelle to fund your spa weekend in Palm Springs? Because Dad was generous? The color drained from her face. How did you? I know everything, Mom. Every car you sold. Every lie you told. Every dollar you stole. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in. We did not steal anything. We are your parents. We have every right. You might want to let go of me, I said quietly. And you might want to talk to a lawyer, a real one this time. That evening, I heard them arguing behind closed doors. Amber's voice joined in, shrill and panicked. What do you mean the wedding might have to be canceled? The Worthingtons will never forgive us. Bradley's mother has already ordered custom ice sculptures. We'll figure something out, Stephen promised. Diana's just being difficult. She'll come around. I smiled grimly, thinking of the documents in Marcus's office. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I went to the garage early, wanting to spend time with what remained of Dad's collection. In the corner, under a dusty tarp, I found his favorite, a 1957 Chevy Bel Air we'd restored together during my high school years. They hadn't sold this one, probably because it needed work. The engine was in pieces, parts scattered across his old workbench. I ran my hand along the car's faded paint, remembering Dad's voice. Patience, princess. Sometimes you have to take things apart completely before you can put them back together the right way. He'd been talking about engines, but the lesson felt especially relevant now. I was taking apart the lies, the fraud, the betrayal, piece by piece. Soon, I'd have enough evidence to rebuild the truth. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bringing George Patterson. Time to drop the hammer. I texted back a simple, and got to work on the Bel Air's engine. Tomorrow would bring chaos, but today I could lose myself in the familiar rhythm of wrenches and ratchets, honoring Dad's memory the best way I knew how. As I worked, I heard Mom and Stephen leaving for a wedding planning session at the country club. They had no idea that while they were picking out flower arrangements and table settings, Marcus's team was serving subpoenas to every auction house, every dealer, every buyer who'd been involved in their scheme. The truth was coming, whether they were ready or not. The morning of the meeting, I arrived at Marcus's office early. Through the window, I watched Mom, Stephen, and Amber pull up in Stephen's BMW. They looked confident, probably expecting to steamroll over any objections I might have about the lake house sale. Mom was wearing her handling difficult situations outfit, a powder blue suit that made her look both authoritative and approachable. Stephen had on his tennis club blazer, a symbol of the status he so desperately craved. Amber was clutching a wedding planning binder thick enough to stop bullets. Marcus met them in the lobby while I waited in the conference room with George Patterson. The elderly lawyer looked nothing like the frail retiree my mother had described. His eyes were sharp, his grip firm as he shook my hand. Your father was a good man, he said quietly. He trusted your mother to honor his wishes. I'm sorry she didn't. Before I could respond, the door opened. Mom's confident smile faltered when she saw George. Stephen's face went slack with shock. Amber just looked confused. Mr. Patterson? Mom's voice was higher than usual. What are you doing here? Interesting question, Mrs. Mitchell. Marcus said, closing the door behind them. Especially since you told your daughter he was retired in Florida. There must be some misunderstanding, Stephen started, but Marcus cut him off. Please sit down, we have a lot to discuss. They sat. I noticed Mom's hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her skirt. She knew exactly what was coming. Marcus opened a thick folder. Let's start with the trust your late husband established for Diana, the one you claimed didn't exist. We never. Mom began, but George Patterson spoke over her. I have here the original trust documents, properly witnessed and filed. James Mitchell was very specific about his wishes. The entire car collection, the lake property, and all related assets were to be held in trust for Diana until she turned 25. He slid copies across the table. I watched as Mom and Stephen's faces grew paler with each page. Furthermore, Marcus continued, we have documented evidence of unauthorized sales of trust assets. He began laying out photographs. The 1969 Chevelle sold to fund a spa vacation. The 1965 Mustang sold to pay for Amber's apartment. The 1970 Challenger sold to cover country club dues. Amber's eyes widened. Mom? Dad? What's he talking about? And most recently, Marcus pressed on, attempts to sell the lake house to pay for an extravagant wedding. A wedding, I might add, that's being financed with stolen money. Stolen? Amber shrieked. What do you mean stolen? He means, I said quietly, that they've been selling off my inheritance piece by piece. Dad's cars, his tools, everything he worked for. They sold it all without having any legal right to do so. That's ridiculous. Stephen slammed his hand on the table. We had every right. The will was invalid. Was it? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Would you like to explain these? He produced more documents, the forged letters, the fake law firm letterhead they used to convince me they had authority to sell. Document forgery, he noted clinically, wire fraud, conversion of trust assets, the list goes on. Mom's facade finally cracked. We needed the money. Stephen's tennis business wasn't doing well, and Amber deserved a wedding paid for with stolen funds. I cut in. Is that what she deserved? Amber burst into tears. The Worthingtons will never forgive us. Bradley's mother has already ordered the ice sculptures. Yes, we know. I sighed. Maybe you should have checked where the money was coming from before spending it. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for argument. First, all sales of trust assets stop immediately. The lake house is off the market as of this morning. But Stephen started. Second, Marcus continued as if he hadn't spoken. You will provide a full accounting of every item sold, every dollar received, and every penny spent. Mr. Patterson and I will be auditing everything. You can't do this. Mom's voice rose desperately. We're family. Family? I stood up slowly. Was it family when you sold Dad's Chevelle? The car we restored together during my senior year? Was it family when you lied about Mr. Patterson retiring so you could steal my inheritance? Was it family when you tried to sell the lake house where Dad taught me to swim? Deanna, please. Mom reached for my hand. I pulled away. The really sad thing is, if you just asked, I might have helped with Amber's wedding. Not by selling Dad's legacy, but maybe we could have found another way. But you didn't ask. You just took. What about my wedding? Amber wailed. It's in 6 weeks. I suggest you start making cancellations, Marcus said firmly, unless you want to add receiving stolen property to the family's legal troubles. We can still fix this, Stephen tried, his voice wheedling. Deanna, be reasonable. Think about your mother, your sister. Stepsister, I corrected. And the time for being reasonable was before you started stealing from me. Marcus laid out more papers, court orders, injunctions, demands for repayment. You have 24 hours to sign these and begin cooperation. After that, we go to the police. The police? Mom went white. You'd send us to jail? You sent yourselves to jail, I said quietly. Every time you sold one of Dad's cars. Every time you lied about the trust. Every time you chose your new family over his wishes. They left the meeting in shambles. Mom crying, Stephen ashen-faced. Amber having a complete meltdown about her ruined wedding. I watched them go, feeling oddly empty. This was victory, but it didn't feel like one. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Marcus's team tracked down most of the cars, though some had been resold and were impossible to recover. The lake house was safe, its attempted sale nullified. Mom and Stephen had to remortgage their house to start repaying what they'd stolen. Amber's wedding was canceled, and with it her engagement. Apparently, Bradley Worthington IA's family had no interest in being associated with criminals. Their word, not mine. She moved back in with her mother, her dreams of social climbing shattered. Mr. Patterson helped me set up proper oversight of the trust, ensuring no one could ever steal from it again. When I finally walked through Dad's garage, now partially refilled with recovered cars, I felt his presence stronger than ever. The 1957 Bel Air still sat in a corner, waiting to be restored. I ran my hand along its fender, remembering all the hours Dad and I had spent working on it together. "I did it, Dad," I whispered. "I protected what you built. I wished it hadn't cost me my family. But then again, maybe they were never really my family to begin with. Family doesn't steal from you. Family doesn't lie to you. Family doesn't try to take what someone worked their whole life to build." 1 year later, I finally graduated from engineering school. The ceremony was small, just me, my professors, and a few friends from the auto shop. Mom sent a card. I returned it unopened. The lake house has become my weekend retreat, a place where I can work on cars in peace, surrounded by the memories of the person who taught me everything important about life. The value of hard work, the importance of integrity, and the courage to stand up for what's right. Sometimes late at night, I sit in Dad's old garage, surrounded by the cars we love together, and I know I made the right choice. Some things are worth more than money. Legacy, honor, truth. Mom and Stephen never understood that. Last week, I finished restoring the Bel Air. As I took it for its first drive, the engine purring exactly the way Dad taught me it should, I felt at peace. They may have taken some things from me, but they couldn't take what mattered most. The knowledge, the memories, the love of something real and honest and true. The legal battles aren't quite over. There are still assets to recover, money to be repaid. Mom occasionally tries to reach out, usually when she needs something. I let those calls go to voicemail. Some people say I was too harsh, that family deserves forgiveness. Maybe they're right. But as I sit in my father's restored garage, surrounded by the legacy he entrusted to me, I know that forgiveness has to be earned. It can't be stolen, like everything else they tried to take. Dad always said every car has a story. Mine is about betrayal and justice, about standing up for what's right even when it hurts. But mostly it's about honoring the person who taught me that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The trust comes into my full control next year when I turn 25. By then, the garage will be completely restored, every car back where it belongs. And maybe then, with time and distance, I'll be ready to think about forgiveness. But for now, I'm content to be my father's daughter, keeper of his legacy, protector of the dreams he built one car at a time. Some might call it just a collection of old cars and a lake house. But to me, it's everything my father was, honest, hardworking, true. And that's worth more than all the wedding ice sculptures in the world. The morning sun filtered through the cafe's windows, casting long shadows across the empty tables. I stood behind the counter, running my fingers over the worn wood where thousands of coffee cups had left their mark over the years. In a few hours, I would have to hand over the keys to my slice of heaven, the Morning Light Cafe. "Sarah, you know this is for the best," Margaret Richardson said, adjusting her designer scarf with manicured fingers. My mother-in-law had the remarkable ability to make even sympathy sound condescending. Running a cafe is hardly suitable for a widow in your position. My position, as if losing James 3 months ago had somehow diminished me, transformed me from a successful business owner into someone who needed their protection and guidance. The Richardsons had never approved of their son marrying a small-town baker, as they liked to call me, though they'd managed to hide their disdain better when James was alive. "The cafe is doing well," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Our revenue has actually increased since we added the new breakfast menu." "Dear," Margaret sighed, sharing a knowing look with her husband George, who stood examining our local art wall like he was appraising garage sale items. "The numbers you think are doing well are barely surviving. The property taxes alone in this area." I bit back a response. They had no idea about the property taxes because I had never shown them the real books. James and I had kept certain aspects of the cafe's operation private, knowing his parents' tendency to meddle. If they knew the truth about our financial situation, about the plans we'd made. But James was gone now, taken by a sudden heart attack at 34, and his parents had spent the last 3 months systematically dismantling everything we built together. "The papers are ready," George announced, finally turning from his inspection of local artwork. "Mr. Phillips will be here at noon to finalize the sale." Mr. Phillips, their family lawyer who had appeared with suspicious speed after James's death, armed with documents showing that the Richardsons had some claim to the cafe through a complex web of family trust agreements. I still wasn't sure how they'd managed it, but they'd made it clear that fighting them would cost more than I could afford. I need to finish packing, I said, turning away to hide the tears threatening to spill. The storage room still held boxes of James's things, recipes we developed together, photos of our early days when the cafe was just a dream, the special roasting equipment he'd surprised me with on our last anniversary. Don't worry about any of that, Margaret said briskly. We'll have people handle the clearance. You should focus on finding alternative employment. The way she said it made it clear she had something specific in mind. Probably the receptionist position at George's law firm that she'd been none too subtly suggesting. A respectable job, as she put it. I waited until they left before allowing myself to break down. Sliding down behind the counter, I pulled out the worn leather notebook James and I had used to plan our future. Inside, behind the recipe notes and profit projections, was a letter from the city planning department dated just 2 weeks before James died. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Richardson, it began. Regarding your inquiry about the proposed downtown development project. James had been so excited when we first heard rumors about the city's plans. Our cafe sat at the corner of what would become the centerpiece of a massive urban renewal project. The entire block would be transformed into a modern shopping and entertainment district. We had attended city council meetings in secret, gathering information, making plans. The property values would skyrocket once the project was announced. Several developers had already made discreet inquiries, offering to buy the building for well above market value. But we had bigger plans. I pulled out another document from the notebook. Architectural plans for an expanded version of Morning Light, incorporating the neighboring vacant lot we quietly purchased through a shell company James had set up. The new cafe would have been spectacular, with rooftop seating overlooking the planned central plaza. A knock at the front door startled me from my memories. Looking up, I saw David Chen, our regular customer and local real estate attorney, peering through the glass. I quickly wiped my eyes and let him in. I heard about the sale, he said without preamble. Sarah, you can't let them do this. I don't have a choice, I replied, automatic response worn smooth from repetition. They found some clause in the family trust. There's always a choice, David insisted, pulling out a thick folder from his briefcase. I've been looking into the property records. The way they're trying to claim ownership through the trust is questionable at best. If you let me help. I shook my head. I can't afford a legal battle, David. They drained me dry before we ever got to court. He started to argue but stopped, noticing something in my expression. David had been more than just a customer over the years. He'd become a friend, someone who understood the subtle dynamics at play. There's something you're not telling me, he said slowly. I glanced at the clock. 10:45 a.m. The sale would be finalized in just over an hour. Part of me wanted to tell David everything, to share the secret James and I had kept so carefully. But the other part, the part that had spent weeks planning this moment, knew better. Just promise me one thing, I said, pulling an envelope from under the counter. Deliver this to Margaret and George in exactly 2 months. David took the envelope, frowning. Sarah, what are you? Promise me, I insisted. 2 months from today, no sooner. He tucked the envelope into his jacket pocket, still looking concerned. At least let me look over the sale documents before you sign. Make sure they're not. It's done. I cut him off. The terms are set. Just trust me on this. After David left, I spent the remaining time walking through the cafe, touching each table, each piece of equipment. The antique espresso machine James had restored himself. The wall of customer photos we'd accumulated over 5 years of business. The hidden corner table where he proposed, getting down on one knee with a ring nestled in a coffee cup. At precisely noon, the bell above the door chimed. Mr. Phillips entered, followed by Margaret and George, all three impeccably dressed for what they clearly saw as a victory lap. Shall we begin? Mr. Phillips asked, spreading documents across our largest table. I sat down across from them, the leather notebook clutched in my lap like a shield. Margaret was already talking about their plans for the space. Some pretentious wine bar concept that would elevate the neighborhood. If only they knew. I signed where indicated, each stroke of the pen feeling like a betrayal and a triumph all at once. James would have understood. He would have seen the beautiful irony of it all. Here are the keys, I said, placing them on the table. The property's all yours. Sarah, Margaret said, her voice dripping with insincere concern. I know this is difficult, but you'll see we're right. This is really the best thing for everyone. I stood gathering my few remaining belongings. At the door, I turned back one last time, taking in the sight of them examining their new acquisition like vultures picking over prey. "You're right about one thing," I said softly. "This really is for the best." They didn't even look up as I left, didn't notice the small smile playing at my lips. In exactly 2 months, they would understand exactly what they'd bought and what they'd lost. But for now, I had a plan to set in motion and a promise to keep to James. The gain was only beginning. 2 weeks after the sale, I sat in my small apartment reviewing the documents James and I had spent years gathering. Property assessments, zoning ordinances, environmental impact studies, all carefully organized in color-coded folders. The wall above my desk was covered in maps and city planning documents showing exactly why our little corner cafe was worth far more than the Richardsons realized. My phone buzzed. A message from David. "They've started renovations. Margaret's supervising personally." I smiled, imagining my mother-in-law micromanaging the contractors, completely unaware of what lay beneath the cafe's foundation. The geological surveys we'd commissioned had confirmed it. Our property sat at the only viable access point for the underground parking structure central to the city's development plan. Without our land, the entire project would have to be redesigned at massive expense. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Amy, my former head barista and closest confidant. "You need to see this," she said, holding up her phone. On the screen was Margaret Richardson's latest social media post, a photo of her standing in front of Morning Light, now stripped of its signage. The caption read, "Exciting changes coming. The Richardson Wine Bar will bring sophistication to this neglected neighborhood." "Neglected?" I muttered. "We have lines around the block every morning." "There's more," Amy said, scrolling through photos. "They're gutting everything, even the original hardwood floors James restored." The mention of James sent a familiar pang through my chest. He would have hated seeing his beloved cafe dismantled, but he also would have appreciated the irony of what was coming. "Have they found it yet?" I asked. Emmy shook her head. "No sign they've discovered the basement vault. Though they did hit a snag when they tried to remove the espresso bar. Apparently it's anchored deeper than they expected." Of course it was. James had installed that bar himself, making sure it concealed the entrance to the vault where we kept our most important documents, including the original property deed with its very special clause. "Any word from City Hall?" I asked, turning back to my wall of documents. "Nothing public yet, but my cousin in the planning department says the announcement is coming soon. They're just waiting for the final environmental impact reports." I nodded, checking my calendar. 6 weeks until David would deliver my envelope to the Richardsons. The timing had to be perfect. Just then, my phone rang. Margaret's number. I had ignored her calls since the sale, but something told me to answer this one. "Sarah." Her voice held an unfamiliar note of tension. "We need to discuss something about the property." "I believe the sale is final." I replied coolly. "The property is yours now." "Yes, well," she paused. "We've encountered some structural issues during renovations. The contractor found some kind of reinforced room beneath the main floor. The plans you provided didn't show any basement level." I smiled. "You mean the plans your lawyer provided? The ones your son helped me falsify before he died?" The silence on the other end was satisfying. "What'd you just say?" Margaret's voice had gone sharp. "Nothing you need to worry about," I said sweetly. "The property is yours now, structural surprises and all. Good luck with the wine bar." I hung up before she could respond, my heart racing. The game was entering its next phase. That evening, I met David at a small diner across town. The envelope I'd given him sat between us on the table as he reviewed the documents I brought. "This is incredible," he said, examining the original property deed. "The clause about mineral and development rights and the geographic survey results. Sarah, do you realize what this means? It means the Richardsons bought a surface property without reading the fine print." I replied, "Everything below ground level, including the access rights the city needs for their project, still belongs to me." David shook his head in amazement. "James helped you set this up." "It was his idea originally. We knew his parents would try something if anything happened to him. They never could accept that he chose a different path from their plans." I thought back to the days when James first told his parents he was leaving their law firm to open a cafe with me. The look of disgust on George's face, Margaret's tears and accusations. They had spent years trying to control him through the family trust, never realizing he was always one step ahead. The city will announce the development project next week, David said, checking his phone. Once they do, property values in the area will skyrocket. The Richardsons will think they've hit the jackpot. Until they try to sell, finished, and discover they can't without my approval. The development can't proceed without the underground access rights, and those belong to me. They'll fight it, David warned. They have resources, connections. And I have this, I said, pulling out one final document, a letter in James's handwriting, dated just days before his death. It detailed everything: his parents' attempts to control him through financial manipulation, their threats when he refused to fall in line, and most importantly, his decision to protect our future by separating the property rights. 2 more weeks, I said, glancing at the calendar. Then the envelope gets delivered. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Through Amy's network of loyal customers, I kept tabs on the Richardsons' renovation progress. They had finally discovered the vault, but the reinforced door had stymied their attempts to open it. Margaret was apparently furious, convinced I was hiding something valuable inside. She wasn't wrong, but she was looking in the wrong direction. 1 week before the envelope's delivery date, the city made its announcement. The downtown development project was unveiled with great fanfare. A $1 billion investment that would transform our quiet neighborhood into a bustling urban center. Property values doubled overnight. Real estate agents began circling like sharks, making offers on any available space. The Richardson social media exploded with self-congratulatory posts about their investment vision in acquiring the cafe. I watched it all from my apartment, adding each new development to my wall of evidence. The city's plans now included detailed renderings of the underground parking structure, accessible only through our property. Engineers had confirmed there was no alternate route that wouldn't require demolishing historic buildings. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. Ms. Mitchell. The voice belonged to Daniel Morgan, chief developer for the city project. We need to discuss the property at 425 Oak Street. The Richardson Wine Bar? I asked innocently. Yes, well, that's partly why I'm calling. We've discovered some complications with the property rights. Our records show you still hold title to certain aspects of the land. I sat back in my chair, James's letter on the desk before me. I'm aware. We'd like to set up a meeting to discuss acquisition of those rights. The project timeline is rather urgent. Of course, I said. But I should warn you, I've already received several offers. He named a figure that made my heart skip. I countered with a higher one. By the end of the call, we had a tentative agreement that would make me a very wealthy woman. But it wasn't about the money. It never had been. 2 days before the envelope's scheduled delivery, Margaret showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked different, her usual perfect composure cracked around the edges. What are you playing at? She demanded as soon as I opened the door. The city's developers keep talking about complications with the property. What did you do? I let her in, watching as she took in my wall of documents, her eyes widening as she began to understand. James helped me protect our investment, I said simply. He knew you tried to take the cafe after he was gone. So we made sure you could only take what we were willing to give up. You can't do this, she whispered. The property is ours. We have the paperwork. You have the surface rights, I corrected. Everything below ground, including the access rights the city needs for their $1 billion project, belongs to me. James made sure of that before he died. Margaret sank onto my couch, her designer outfit suddenly looking out of place in my modest apartment. Why? She asked, her voice small. Why would he do this to us? To you? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. You spent years trying to control him, belittling his choices, using the family trust to manipulate him. He built something real, something honest, and you couldn't stand it. We were protecting him, she protested. The cafe, it was so beneath him. The cafe was his dream, I cut in. Our dream. And now it's going to pay for everything we planned together. I handed her a copy of the city's development plans, watching as she realized the full implications. The property she thought they'd snatch away from me for a bargain price was worthless without the rights I still held. George will fight this, she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. Good, I replied, because in 2 days you're going to receive some very interesting documents. Things James wanted you to see after you showed your true colors. She left looking shaken, her perfect world crumbling around her. I watched from my window as she got into her luxury car, hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. The next day, I visited James's grave, bringing his favorite coffee blend and the news he would have loved to hear. We did it, I whispered, touching the cool stone. Everything we planned, everything we built, it's all working out exactly as you said it would. In less than 24 hours, David would deliver the envelope that would change everything. Inside were copies of every document proving the Richardsons' manipulation, James's letter detailing their threats, and most importantly, proof that he had outsmarted them one final time. The game was almost over, and justice was about to be served in ways they never saw coming. The morning David was scheduled to deliver the envelope, I sat in his office watching the security feed from the Richardsons' law firm on his laptop. At precisely 9 a.m., he walked into their plush reception area, envelope in hand. They're all gathered in the conference room, he told me through our phone connection. George, Margaret, their lawyers, even some of the senior partners. Perfect, I replied, my heart racing. Just like James would have wanted. The feed showed David being escorted into the conference room. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see Margaret's face go pale as she opened the envelope. George grabbed the documents from her hands, his expression darkening with each page he read. Inside that envelope was everything. Proof that James had legally separated the surface and subsurface property rights years ago. Documentation of the Richardsons' attempts to manipulate him through the family trusts, and most devastatingly, James's final letter to his parents. Dear Mother and Father, it began. If you're reading this, then everything has happened exactly as I predicted. You've tried to take what Sarah and I built, thinking you could simply sweep in and claim it as your own. But I've spent years preparing for this moment, protecting our legacy from your greed. My phone buzzed. A message from Amy. You need to see this. They're tearing up the cafe floor. Attached was a photo showing contractors breaking through the hardwood, revealing the reinforced concrete beneath. They were obviously looking for something, not realizing that the real treasure wasn't in a vault they'd discovered. Back on the security feed, I watched George stand up suddenly, his face contorted with rage. The other lawyers were passing documents around, their expressions growing more concerned by the minute. They just found the property records, David narrated. They're realizing that without the subsurface rights, they can't sell to any developers. The wine bar is worthless. Another message from Amy. City inspectors just showed up. They're posting notices about required permits for structural modifications. Everything was falling into place exactly as James had planned. The Richardsons had been so eager to seize control of the cafe that they hadn't bothered with proper due diligence. Now their rushed renovations were about to cost them dearly. My phone rang, Daniel Morgan from the City Development Office. Ms. Mitchell, he said without preamble. We've reviewed your counteroffer for the subsurface rights. The council has approved the full amount. I smiled, thinking of the number we'd discussed, nearly 3 times what the Richardsons had paid for the entire cafe. When would you like to meet to finalize the paperwork? I asked. That's actually why I'm calling, he replied. The Richardsons' lawyers just contacted us. They're claiming fraud, saying the property rights separation wasn't properly disclosed during the sale. Check the sales contract, I said calmly. Page 17, paragraph 3, subsection B. They signed off on acquiring surface rights only to the property. It's in black and white. The security feed showed George storming out of the conference room, phone pressed to his ear. Moments later, my phone rang again. His number. You planned this, he snarled when I answered. You and James, you set us up. No, George, I replied evenly. You set yourselves up. You were so convinced you could bully and manipulate your way to what you wanted that you never bothered to read what you were actually buying. We'll fight this, he threatened. We have resources. So do I cut in. Thanks to you actually, the money you paid for the cafe surface rights, James and I used it to hire the best property rights attorneys in the state. Would you like their numbers? After he hung up, I watched through the security feed as he returned to the conference room. The other lawyers were packing up their briefcases, clearly wanting no part of what was coming. Margaret sat alone at the table, still reading James's letter. Through the grainy footage, I could see tears running down her face. By afternoon, news of the development project had hit the local media. Property values in the area soared even higher as details of the planned transformation emerged. The Richardson's wine bar concept, which had seemed pretentious before, now looked hopelessly out of place in what would become the city's premier shopping and entertainment district. I met Amy for coffee at our old rival cafe across town. She handed me her phone, showing social media lighting up with the story. "They're saying the Richardsons got conned," she said, scrolling through comments. "But anyone who knows the real story is celebrating. You should see what your old customers are saying." I smiled, remembering all the regulars who had supported us over the years, who had understood what morning light meant to the community. They would appreciate the justice of it all. A text from David interrupted our conversation. "Margaret's here. She wants to talk." 20 minutes later, I walked into David's office to find my mother-in-law sitting alone, looking smaller and older than I remembered. James' letter lay on the table between us. "Why didn't he tell us," she asked quietly, "about the development plans, about what you were building together? Would you have listened?" I countered. "Or would you have tried to take control of that too?" She dabbed at her eyes with an expensive handkerchief. "We thought we were protecting him. The family name, the legacy." "James built his own legacy," I said firmly. Morning Light wasn't just a cafe. It was proof that he could succeed on his own terms, without your money or connections. "And now," she asked, "what happens now?" I pulled out the city's final offer for the subsurface rights, sliding it across the table. Her eyes widened at the number. "This is what you'll be fighting if you pursue legal action," I explained. "Every major developer in the city wants these rights. They'll wait years while you tie things up in court. But in the end, the property laws are clear. James made sure of that." "And the letter?" Her voice cracked. "The things he wrote about us, about how we treated him. That was his gift to you," I said softly. "One last chance to understand who he really was, what really mattered to him." I left her there with the letter and the contract, knowing she had decisions to make. The Richardsons could fight, spend years and fortunes in court, but they couldn't change what James had done. He had protected our dream, ensuring it would survive even without him. 2 weeks later, I stood watching as workers removed the Richardson wine bar sign from the cafe's facade. The sale of the subsurface rights had been finalized, making me wealthy enough to buy back the surface rights at twice what they had paid. Morning Light would reopen exactly as James and I had planned. The new design incorporated both the historic building and modern elements that would complement the development project. The rooftop garden we had dreamed of would happen after all. Amy supervised as our old equipment was moved back in, including James's beloved espresso machine. The contractors had never managed to open the vault, which was fine. Its contents had served their purpose. David joined me as I unlocked the front door, the familiar bell chiming above. "They're still in shock," he said, referring to the Richardsons. "George retired from the firm yesterday. Margaret hasn't been seen at the country club in weeks." I ran my hand along the counter, remembering all the mornings James and I had spent here, planning our future between serving customers. "It was never about hurting them," I said. "James just wanted them to understand that success doesn't always look the way they imagined it." The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting the same warm light that had given the cafe its name. On the wall, I hung a new photo. James on opening day 5 years ago, his smile radiant as he served our first customer. Below it, I placed a framed copy of the city's development plans showing Morning Light as the cornerstone of the transformed neighborhood, exactly as we had envisioned it. My phone buzzed, a message from Margaret. "He would be proud of you, of what you've built, what you protected." Maybe it was a start. Maybe understanding comes in small moments, in realizations that arrive too late but matter anyway. I began preparing for our reopening, measuring coffee beans into the grinder James had calibrated perfectly. The familiar aroma filled the air as customers began lining up outside, drawn by the grand reopening sign and the promise of something both old and new. Morning Light would shine again, brighter than ever. Not just as a cafe, but as proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply staying true to your dreams, protecting what matters, and letting justice unfold in its own perfect time. James had known that all along. Now everyone else did too. "Ready to open?" Amy asked, tying on her apron. I touched the wedding ring I wore on a chain around my neck, feeling James's presence in every corner of the space we had created together. "More than ready," I replied, turning the sign to open. The morning light streamed in, and with it came the future we had planned. Different than we'd imagined, but no less beautiful for the change. Sometimes the fine print isn't about what you're giving up, but what you're protecting. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in the battle, but in the quiet wisdom of preparing for it. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice tastes exactly like a perfect cup of coffee, served exactly where it was always meant to be. "Grandma wants to see you." I looked up from my laptop to find my sister Victoria standing in my doorway, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against the frame. Something about her expression made my stomach tighten, a hint of smugness that seemed out of place given our grandmother's condition. "I just saw her this morning," I said, checking the time. It was barely past noon. "Dr. Mitchell said she needed rest." Victoria's lips curved into what might have been a smile, but there was nothing warm about it. "Well, she's asking for you now, unless you're too busy with your little writing projects to spend time with our dying grandmother." The jab was typical Victoria, always finding ways to diminish my work as a novelist while flaunting her own success in real estate. I closed my laptop and stood, refusing to take the bait. "I'll go now. My name is Olivia Bennett, and for the past 3 months I've been living in my grandmother Eleanor's mansion, helping care for her as pancreatic cancer slowly took her from us." Victoria visited occasionally, usually when the lawyers were around, but I was the one who sat with Grandma through sleepless nights, who held her hand during chemo, who read to her when her eyes were too tired to focus on the pages herself. The mansion's long hallways echoed with memories as I made my way to Grandma's room. Every antique, every painting, every creaking floorboard had a story. I'd grown up exploring these corridors, discovering hidden nooks and treating the whole place like my personal wonderland. Victoria had always preferred the country club, spending time with the right people, building connections she could use later. Outside Grandma's door, I paused. Voices drifted through the heavy oak, Victoria's lawyer, Mr. Whitman, and someone from the bank. My heart sank. This wasn't a social call. I knocked softly and entered to find Grandma propped up in her massive 4-poster bed, looking frailer than she had that morning. Victoria stood by the window, that same smug smile playing at her lips. 2 men in expensive suits sat in the antique chairs by the bed. "Olivia, darling," Grandma said, her voice weaker than I remembered. "Come sit with me." I moved to her side, taking her thin hand in mine. Her skin felt like paper, so delicate I was afraid it might tear. "Should I come back later?" I asked, eyeing the lawyers. No, Mr. Whitman said smoothly. "We've finished our business. Your grandmother just needs to sign a few papers." Victoria stepped forward, holding out an elegant fountain pen. Grandpa's old one, I realized with a start. "It's all ready, Grandma, just like we discussed." Something felt wrong. Grandma's hand trembled as she took the pen, and her signature was barely legible as she scratched it across the documents. Mr. Whitman gathered them quickly, tucking them into his briefcase with an efficiency that seemed almost rehearsed. "What was that about?" I asked after they'd left, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just some updates to my will, dear," Grandma said, her eyes already drooping. "Victoria's been so helpful, explaining all the legal terminology." She drifted off to sleep before finishing the sentence. I tucked the blankets around her, my mind racing. Victoria had never shown much interest in legal matters before, unless there was something in it for her. "She's just trying to make things easier," Victoria said from the doorway, as if reading my thoughts. "Unlike some people, I actually understand business matters." I turned to face her. "What did you do, Victoria?" She examined her perfect manicure, unbothered by my tone. "I helped Grandma make some sensible decisions about her estate. Someone had to, while you were busy playing nurse and working on your little stories." "They're not stories," I said, fighting to keep my voice down. "I'm a published author. My last book was nominated for." Yes, some literary award nobody's heard of." She waved her hand dismissively. "Meanwhile, I've tripled my real estate portfolio this year alone. I know how to manage wealth, Olivia. How to make it grow. Grandma understands that." Before I could respond, Grandma stirred in her sleep, making a small sound of distress. I hurried back to her side, adjusting her pillows and checking her pain medication levels. By the time I looked up again, Victoria was gone. That night, unable to sleep, I wandered the mansion's dark halls. The place felt different after sunset, more mysterious, as if the antiques and artwork were trying to tell me something. I found myself in Grandma's library, a vast room lined with leather-bound books and family photographs. A picture on her desk caught my eye, me at my college graduation, standing between Grandma and Grandpa. His proud smile, Grandma's elegant pose, my own face beaming with possibility. Grandpa had passed away 2 years later, leaving Grandma to manage their considerable fortune alone. She'd done more than manage it. Eleanor Bennett was a force of nature, turning my grandfather's successful manufacturing business into a diverse empire of investments and real estate. Victoria liked to brag about her business acumen, but she learned everything she knew from Grandma. Movement in the hallway made me freeze. Victoria's voice drifted through the door, speaking in hushed tones on her phone. "It's done. No, she has no idea. The old woman signed everything today. Trust me, by this time next month, it'll all be mine." My blood ran cold. The smugness, the lawyers, the mysterious documents, it all made sense now. Victoria had somehow convinced Grandma to change her will, probably taking advantage of the confusion caused by her medication. I wanted to confront her immediately, to wake Grandma and demand answers, but I knew that in her weakened state, any confrontation could be dangerous for her. I needed to be smart about this to figure out exactly what Victoria had done before making my move. The next morning, I called the one person who might be able to help. Mark Sullivan, my best friend since college and now a junior partner at a law firm across town. "A new will?" he said when I explained my suspicions. "That's tricky, Liv. She was competent when she signed it." "She's on heavy pain medication," I argued. "Victoria must have caught her during a lucid moment, but you know how the drugs affect her judgment." Mark sighed. "Look, I can make some discreet inquiries, but unless we can prove undue influence or lack of capacity, there might not be much we can do." I spent the next few weeks gathering evidence while continuing to care for Grandma. Her decline accelerated, and soon she was sleeping most of the day. Victoria visited more frequently now, always with documents for Grandma to sign, always when she was most heavily medicated. I documented everything: dates, times, medications, who was present. I took photos of the pill bottles, noted Grandma's mental state, recorded conversations when I could, but it felt like trying to hold back the tide with a paper cup. One afternoon, I was helping Grandma sort through some old photographs when she suddenly gripped my hand with surprising strength. "The blue room," she whispered, her eyes intense. "Behind the painting of the lighthouse. Remember." Before I could ask what she meant, Victoria swept in with another lawyer in tow. "Grandma, Mr. Patterson is here about those property transfers we discussed." I was ushered out of the room, Grandma's cryptic message echoing in my mind. The blue room had been her private study, a place where even Victoria and I weren't allowed to play as children. And the lighthouse painting, I remembered it hanging above an antique writing desk, one of Grandma's favorite pieces. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I slipped into the blue room. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting strange shadows on the walls. The lighthouse painting hung exactly where I remembered, its pale beam seeming to wink at me in the darkness. I reached for the frame, my heart pounding. It swung away from the wall easily, revealing a small wall safe behind it. But without the combination, it was useless. I tried a few meaningful dates: Grandma's birthday, the day she married Grandpa, the year the company was founded. Nothing worked. A noise in the hallway sent me scrambling back to my room, the safe's contents remaining a mystery. The next day, Grandma took a turn for the worse. The hospice nurse increased her medication, and she drifted in and out of consciousness. Victoria practically moved into the mansion, bringing an endless parade of lawyers and bankers through Grandma's room. I kept trying to get a moment alone with Grandma to ask about the safe, but Victoria was always there, hovering, controlling access like a jealous guard dog. 2 weeks later, Grandma Eleanor Bennett passed away quietly in her sleep. I was holding her hand when it happened, reading to her from her favorite Jane Austen novel. Victoria was at a business lunch. The funeral was exactly the kind of elaborate affair Victoria loved. Hundreds of guests, expensive flowers, catered reception at the country club. I sat in the front row, numb with grief, while Victoria worked the crowd like a politician at a fundraiser. "Such a tragedy," I overheard her telling someone. "But at least everything's been properly arranged. The estate will be in capable hands." The will reading was scheduled for the following Monday. As I drove to the lawyer's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. Victoria's new Mercedes was already parked outside, gleaming in the morning sun like a well-polished threat. Mr. Whitman's office was all dark wood and leather, the kind of place that reeked of old money and quiet power. Victoria sat in one of the visitor chairs, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than I made in 3 months as a writer. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Whitman asked, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. What happened next felt like watching a car crash in slow motion. The new will, signed just weeks before Grandma's death, left everything: the mansion, the business interests, the investments, everything to Victoria. My inheritance had been reduced to a small trust fund that would pay out a modest monthly stipend. "Are you sure this is right?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Grandma always said she wanted to split things equally. "The previous will was revoked," Mr. Whitman said smoothly. "Your grandmother was very clear about her final wishes." Victoria stood, gathering her designer purse. "Well, I should get started. There's so much to manage." She paused by my chair, her smile sharp as a razor. "Don't worry, little sister. I'll let you keep your room in the mansion. For now, though you might want to start looking for a small apartment, something more appropriate to your means." I sat there long after they'd left, staring at the copy of the will in my hands. Everything we'd grown up believing, all of Grandma's promises about preserving the family legacy for both of us, gone with a few strokes of a pen. But as I drove back to the mansion, no longer my home, I realized with a fresh wave of pain. I remembered Grandma's last cryptic message. The blue room. The lighthouse painting. She'd been trying to tell me something. That night, I waited until Victoria retired to the master suite. She'd already moved into Grandma's room before making my way to the blue room. The lighthouse painting watched as I once again tried to crack the safe's combination. Just as I was about to give up, a memory surfaced. Grandma teaching me to play chess when I was 7, telling me that sometimes the best move isn't the most obvious one. On a hunch, I tried the chess notation for her favorite opening move, E4. The safe clicked open. Inside was a single envelope, my name written in Grandma's elegant handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, and what I found inside would change everything. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that the game wasn't over, it was just beginning. My hands trembled as I unfolded the contents of Grandma's envelope. Inside I found a letter, a small brass key, and what looked like a bank statement from the Cayman Islands. "My dearest Olivia," the letter began in Grandma's familiar elegant script. "If you're reading this, then 2 things have happened. I'm no longer with you, and Victoria has shown her true colors. I've watched her manipulate and scheme her way through life, always taking the easy path, never understanding the true value of what we built. But you, my darling girl, you have your grandfather's heart and my mind, a dangerous combination." I sank into Grandma's old leather chair, my heart pounding as I continued reading. "The key enclosed opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank, box number 2247. What you find inside will help you restore balance to our family legacy. Victoria believes she knows everything about our family's wealth. But your grandfather and I were smarter than that. We never kept all our eggs in one basket." The bank statement showed a balance that made my eyes widen. Over $50 million in an offshore account completely separate from the family's known assets. "But be careful, my dear," the letter continued. "Victoria is more dangerous than you know. The night your grandfather died wasn't the peaceful passing everyone believes it to be. I've spent years gathering evidence, protecting you both while trying to understand the truth. Now that burden passes to you." I nearly dropped the letter. Was Grandma suggesting that Victoria had something to do with Grandpa's death? The implications were staggering. A noise in the hallway made me quickly return everything to the safe except the key, which I slipped into my pocket. Just in time, Victoria appeared in the doorway, wearing silk pajamas that probably cost more than my car. "What are you doing in here?" she demanded, eyes narrowing. "Just remembering," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. This was always Grandma's favorite room. "Well, it's my house now," she said, walking in and running her hand possessively along the antique desk. "And I'm thinking of renovating. All these old things, they're so dated." I watched her examine the lighthouse painting, my heart racing. Did she know about the safe behind it? But she just wrinkled her nose and moved on. "You should start packing," she added casually. I'm having the house redecorated next week, and your room needs to be cleared out. The will said I could stay. The will gives me full control of the property, she cut in, her smile sharp. And I'm exercising that control. You have until Friday. After she left, I sat in the darkness for a long time, thinking about Grandma's letter. If what she suggested was true, my sister wasn't just greedy. She was dangerous. The next morning, I called Mark. I need your help, I said when he picked up. What do you know about Cayman Islands banking laws? Enough to know I should pretend you didn't ask me that, he replied. What's going on, Liv? We met at a small cafe far from the mansion, where I showed him copies I'd made of the documents from the safe. His eyes widened as he read. This is significant, he said finally. If these accounts exist, they were never included in the estate inventory. And these allegations about your grandfather's death. Can you help me access the safety deposit box? I asked. I don't want to do it alone. He nodded slowly. First thing tomorrow. But Liv, be careful. If Victoria realizes what you found. She won't, I assured him, though my stomach churned at the thought. That afternoon, as I packed my room, I found myself looking at old family photos. One in particular caught my eye. Victoria and me as children, standing with Grandpa in his study. He was showing us his collection of rare coins, something that had fascinated us both as kids. Victoria was holding one, smiling at the camera, while I examined another with a magnifying glass. The memory hit me suddenly, Grandpa teaching us about numismatics, explaining how some coins were worth millions to the right collector. His collection had been extensive, worth a fortune, but after his death. The coins, I whispered, they hadn't been listed in any of the estate inventories. At the time, everyone assumed they'd been sold years ago, but what if? The next morning, Mark met me outside First National Bank just as it opened. The process of accessing the safety deposit box was surprisingly straightforward. Grandma had already added my name to the access list. When the bank officer left us alone in the viewing room, my hands shook as I inserted the key. Inside the box was another envelope, a USB drive, and a small leather-bound notebook. Your grandfather's journal, I breathed, recognizing his handwriting. The envelope contained detailed records of transactions, offshore account numbers, and most importantly, a complete inventory of Grandpa's coin collection, which, according to the documents, had been secretly moved to a private vault in Switzerland just days before his death. Look at this, Mark said, pointing to one of the transaction records. A wire transfer from Victoria's personal account to an unlisted number in the Cayman Islands, dated the day before your grandfather died. But she was just starting out then, I said, frowning. She wouldn't have had this kind of money. Unless she was working with someone else, Mark suggested. Someone who stood to gain from your grandfather's death. The USB drive contained video files, security footage from the mansion's old camera system. With trembling fingers, I plugged it into my laptop. The footage was grainy but clear enough. It showed Victoria in Grandpa's study late at night, arguing with a man I didn't recognize. The timestamp showed it was the night before Grandpa died. You promised me control, Victoria was saying. Once he's gone, I get everything. The man's response was inaudible. But his body language was threatening. Victoria looked scared but determined. The next clip showed Grandpa in his study the following evening, drinking from his usual whiskey glass. Hours later, the cameras caught Victoria and the same man removing something from the study. Grandpa's briefcase. The one he always kept his most important documents in. This is evidence of conspiracy, Mark whispered. But to prove murder, we'd need more. I opened Grandpa's journal, flipping to the last entries. His normally neat handwriting was shaky, urgent. V meeting with Emma again. Can't trust. Changed my will today. Eleanor knows something's wrong. Coins moved. Safe in Zurich. Account numbers in. The rest was illegible, but it was enough. Grandpa had known something was wrong. He tried to protect the family's assets, working with Grandma to move things offshore before it was too late. We need to move carefully, Mark advised. Victoria has legal control of the estate right now. One wrong move, and she could liquidate everything before we can stop her. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Moving company arrives tomorrow at 9. Anything left in your room gets thrown out. I looked at Mark, my mind racing. How quickly can you file an injunction? Give me an hour with these documents, he said, already pulling out his phone. And Liv, Don't go back to the mansion alone. But I had to go back. There was something else in the blue room safe, something I'd glimpsed but hadn't had time to grab. A small red notebook that could only be Grandma's private diary. I'll be careful, I promised, gathering the documents. Just get that injunction. As I drove back to the mansion, storm clouds gathered overhead. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a warning of things to come. Victoria's Mercedes was in the driveway, along with an unfamiliar black SUV. I let myself in quietly, making my way to the blue room. But as I approached, I heard voices, Victoria and a man, arguing in heated whispers. She knows something, the man was saying. His voice was familiar, the same one from the security footage. The bank called. She accessed the box this morning. Impossible, Victoria snapped. She's nothing but a wannabe writer. She doesn't know anything about. I must have made a noise because they both suddenly fell silent, then footsteps headed toward the door. I turned to run, but I wasn't fast enough. Well, Victoria said from behind me, her voice cold as ice. It seems my little sister has been quite busy today. I spun around to face her and the man. Tall, expensively dressed, with cold eyes that assessed me like I was a bug to be squashed. Missing something? Victoria asked, holding up Grandma's red diary. Maybe this? The man took a step forward, and I realized I was trapped between them and the stairs. We need to talk, little sister, Victoria said, her smile sharp as broken glass. About family secrets and why some of them should stay buried. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the scene like a macabre photograph. In that instant, I saw something in Victoria's eyes I'd never seen before. Not just greed or anger, but genuine darkness. And I knew that everything was about to change. Thunder cracked overhead as I faced my sister and her mysterious companion in the mansion's dark hallway. Victoria held Grandma's diary like a weapon, her manicured nails digging into its worn red cover. Marcus, why don't you make sure we're not interrupted? Victoria said, her eyes never leaving my face. The man, Marcus, moved to block the stairs, effectively cutting off my escape route. Now then, Victoria continued, stepping closer. Let's discuss what you found in that safety deposit box. My mind raced. Mark would be filing the injunction soon, but legal protection wouldn't help if I didn't make it out of here. I needed to play this carefully. Just some old photos, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. Memories of better times. Before you started conspiring to kill our grandfather. The words hung in the air like smoke. Victoria's perfectly composed expression cracked for just a moment, surprise, then fear, then something darker flashing across her face. You always did have an overactive imagination, she said, but her voice wavered slightly. All those silly stories you write. Is that what this is? Another one of your fantasies? The security footage isn't a fantasy, I shot back. Neither are the bank records showing your payment to Marcus the night before Grandpa died. Marcus took a step forward, but Victoria held up her hand to stop him. You have no idea what you're talking about, she said. What happened to Grandpa was unfortunate, but natural. Everyone knows that. Grandma knew better. I nodded toward the diary in her hands. That's why she kept records, isn't it? Why she spent years gathering evidence. She was protecting me while building a case against you. Victoria's laugh was sharp and brittle. Protecting you? Poor, naive Olivia. Grandma was protecting her money just like everyone else in this family. Why do you think she changed her will at the end? Because you manipulated her while she was dying. I helped her see reason, Victoria snapped. This family's wealth needs someone strong to manage it, someone who understands business, not some dreamer who spends her time making up stories. Is that what you told Grandpa too? I asked quietly, before even Marcus poisoned his whiskey. The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. My cheek stung as Victoria grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. You need to be very careful about what accusations you make, she hissed. Just then, both our phones buzzed simultaneously. Victoria kept her grip on my arm as she checked her screen. I watched her face pale as she read what I knew must be a notice of the injunction Mark had filed. What did you do? She demanded, shaking me. A calm settled over me, the kind of clarity that comes when you know you finally gained the upper hand. I did exactly what Grandma and Grandpa prepared me to do. I protected our family's true legacy. Marcus. Victoria's voice rose with panic. She's frozen our access to the estate. Call Harrison. Tell him to start liquidating everything now. That won't work, I said, unable to keep the satisfaction from my voice. The offshore accounts, the coin collection in Switzerland, none of it was ever part of the estate. Grandpa moved everything before he died, didn't he? That's why you were so angry that night. He'd outmaneuvered you. Victoria's grip loosened as realization dawned in her eyes. The coins. How did you? Grandma left me a key, but not just to the safety deposit box. She left me the key to everything. All the accounts, all the documentation, all the evidence against you. It's already in the hands of the authorities. The sound of cars pulling up outside made Victoria's head snap around. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, illuminating the hallway in an eerie strobe. Police, a voice called from downstairs. Victoria Bennett, we have a warrant. Marcus bolted toward the back stairs, but Victoria remained frozen, staring at me with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. You're bluffing, she whispered. You couldn't possibly have. I pulled out my phone and played the security footage, not the grainy version from the USB drive, but a crystal clear copy showing Victoria and Marcus in Grandpa's study, discussing payment details and poison dosages. Grandma upgraded the security system after Grandpa died, I explained. Installed hidden cameras everywhere. She knew you'd try again eventually. Victoria lunged for my phone, but I was ready this time. I stepped back, letting her momentum carry her past me. She stumbled, Grandma's diary flying from her hands. It hit the floor and split open, spilling photographs and documents across the hardwood. Footsteps thundered up the stairs as police officers swarmed the hallway. Victoria tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. I watched in silence as they handcuffed my sister, reading her rights as they led her away. One of the detectives stayed behind to take my statement. As I described discovering Grandma's letter and the evidence she gathered, I couldn't help but look through the scattered contents of her diary. Among the papers was a photograph I'd never seen before. Grandma and Grandpa on their wedding day, young and radiant with possibility. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, the detective said, following my gaze. She contacted us months ago, sharing her suspicions, but she needed time to gather concrete evidence. That's why she played along with Victoria's manipulation, I realized. She was protecting me while building an airtight case. Hours later, after the police had finished processing the scene, I sat alone in the blue room. The lighthouse painting still hung on the wall, now hiding an empty safe, but its secrets had served their purpose. My phone buzzed, a message from Mark. Just heard from the Swiss bank. The coin collection is intact. Estimated value, $75 million. Call me when you can. I leaned back in Grandma's chair, emotion washing over me in waves. Victoria and Marcus were in custody, along with several co-conspirators including Mr. Whitman, who had helped orchestrate the fake will changes. The family's true assets were secure, and more importantly, Grandpa would finally have justice. A soft knock at the door made me look up. Anna, our housekeeper of 20 years, stood there with tears in her eyes. Miss Olivia, she said. I should have told you sooner. The night your grandfather died, I saw. I stood and took her hands in mine. It's okay, Anna. We know everything now. She nodded, squeezing my hands. Your grandmother was so proud of you. She knew you'd be the one to make things right. As if to emphasize her words, I noticed something carved into the arm of Grandma's chair, tiny letters worn smooth by years of use. Truth prevails. Over the next few weeks, the full story emerged. Victoria had partnered with Marcus, a corrupt investment banker, to gain control of the family fortune. They'd started with Grandpa, thinking his death would leave everything vulnerable. But Grandpa had suspected something was wrong and had taken steps to protect his legacy. Grandma had carried on his work, carefully documenting Victoria's crimes while appearing to be a helpless victim. She'd known my sister would try to take advantage of her illness, and she used that assumption to lay a perfect trap. The investigation uncovered other victims, wealthy families whose fortunes had mysteriously disappeared after dealing with Marcus's investment firm. Victoria had been his inside connection to high society, helping him identify targets while building her own real estate empire on stolen money. I donated most of Grandpa's coin collection to museums, keeping just a few special pieces he'd shown me as a child. The offshore accounts were restructured into a charitable foundation, funding arts education and literacy programs. causes that would have made Grandma smile. The mansion felt different now, lighter somehow. I kept most of the antiques but opened up the dark rooms, letting in sun and fresh air. The blue room became my writing study, the lighthouse painting still keeping watch over its empty safe. One evening, about 6 months after Victoria's arrest, I found myself looking through old family albums. There was a picture of all of us, Grandma, Grandpa, Victoria, and me, taken at my high school graduation. Everyone was smiling, looking like the perfect family. Appearances can be deceiving, Grandma had always said. But the truth has a way of coming out. She'd left me more than just money and evidence. She'd left me a lesson about patience, about justice, about the power of playing the long game. Victoria had always thought strength meant taking what you wanted. She never understood that true strength lies in protecting what matters. The next morning, I visited Victoria in prison. She looked smaller somehow, her designer clothes replaced by a drab uniform, her perfect makeup gone. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I placed Grandma's diary on a table between us. Because you should know who she really was, who they both were. Victoria stared at the diary, her hands twitching as if she wanted to grab it. "They never trusted me," she said bitterly, "always favored you." "They trusted both of us," I corrected. "You're the one who betrayed that trust." I left her there with the diary, knowing she'd finally understand the full scope of her failure. Not just the loss of money or freedom, but the loss of something far more valuable. The legacy of 2 people who had built something worth protecting. Back at the mansion, I walked through rooms filled with memories. The antiques that had witnessed our family's rise and fall. The photographs that told stories both true and false. The quiet corners where a little girl once played while her grandmother watched. Planning, preparing, protecting. In the blue room, I sat at my desk and began to write. Not a novel this time, but a different kind of story. The true story of Eleanor Bennett, who had outmaneuvered her enemies from beyond the grave. Of William Bennett, who had sacrificed everything to protect his legacy. Of a sister consumed by greed, and another sister who found strength in truth. Outside, the sun set behind the lighthouse painting, its beam seeming to wink at me one last time. I touched Mom's sapphire pendant, a piece of the inheritance that really mattered, and smiled. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply letting the truth come to light, one carefully planned revelation at a time. I am Olivia Bennett, guardian of my family's true legacy. Not the money or the mansion or the rare coins, but the wisdom to know that wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the choices we make, the truths we protect, and the stories we leave behind. And my story was just beginning. Absolutely not, Sarah. I don't care what kind of personal emergency you think you have. The Peterson account presentation is next week, and I need everyone focused and present. Victoria Marshall's voice cut through the air like a knife, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her mahogany desk as she stared me down. I stood my ground, clutching the medical leave request form in my trembling hands. "Ms. Marshall, please. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical. The patient. She interrupted, her red lips curling into a sneer. "You're an account executive, Sarah, not a nurse. Whatever medical drama you're caught up in isn't our concern. This is a marketing firm, not a charity." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I understand that, but this is different. He has no one else, and his condition is deteriorating rapidly. I just need 1 week. Enough." Victoria slammed her hand on the desk, making me jump. "I've heard enough of your excuses. You've been distracted for weeks, taking long lunches, leaving early. Now you want a whole week off right before our biggest presentation of the year?" The answer is no. I felt my chest tighten. Victoria had always been harsh, but this was different. This was cruel. "Ms. Marshall, I've never taken a sick day in 3 years. I've worked every holiday, every weekend you've asked. I'm just asking for this one. 1 week that could cost us millions," she cut in, standing up to her full height. At 5'10" in her designer heels, she towered over me. "Do you have any idea what the Peterson account means to this firm?" "Of course you don't. You're too wrapped up in your little humanitarian project to see the bigger picture." The way she said humanitarian project made it sound like a dirty word. I thought about the man lying in the hospital bed across town, his kind eyes and gentle smile despite the pain he was in. He didn't deserve to die alone just because Victoria Marshall couldn't see past her quarterly projections. "I'm taking a week," I said quietly but firmly. "I'll work remotely nights, weekends, whatever it takes. But I need to be there for him." Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Are you defying me, Sarah?" "I'm doing what's right." She laughed, a cold, harsh sound that echoed through her corner office. "What's right? Let me tell you what's right. What's right is doing your job. What's right is being a team player. What's right is understanding that in this business, we don't have the luxury of playing Mother Teresa." I stood there, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. "I understand if you need to write me up or dock my pay, but I'm taking a week." Victoria walked around her desk slowly, like a predator circling its prey. "Oh, I'll do better than that." She picked up my leave request form and tore it in half, then quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. "You're fired." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to let her see me flinch. "You're firing me for requesting medical leave. I'm firing you for insubordination, poor performance, and failure to prioritize company interests." She smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. "Enjoy unemployment, Sarah. I'm sure your patient will appreciate your sacrifice." I should have felt devastated. 3 years of my life, countless 60-hour weeks, all the missed family events and canceled vacations, all gone in an instant. But standing there in Victoria's office, watching her smug satisfaction, I felt something else entirely: relief. "Thank you for making this decision easier," I said, turning to leave. "Oh, and Sarah," Victoria called after me, "don't bother asking for a reference. As far as I'm concerned, you never worked here." I walked out of her office with my head held high, ignoring the curious stares of my soon-to-be ex-coworkers. My hands were steady as I packed up my desk, carefully placing my photos and personal items into a cardboard box. Jenny from accounting hurried over, her face full of concern. "Sarah, what happened?" I heard raised voices. "Victoria fired me," I said simply, wrapping my favorite coffee mug in newspaper. "What?" "She can't do that. Not over medical leave." I smiled at Jenny's outrage. "She can, and she did. But it's okay, really." And surprisingly, it was. As I walked out of the glass and steel building that had been my professional home for the past 3 years, I felt lighter than I had in months. My career might be in shambles, but I knew I was doing the right thing. The hospital was a 20-minute drive from the office. As I navigated through mid-A traffic, I thought about how I'd ended up here. It had started. Thomas Edwards didn't look like a man worth millions. In his faded hospital gown, with his silver hair thinning and his face gaunt from chemotherapy, he looked like any other patient. But it was his eyes that caught my attention, bright, alert, and filled with a kindness that seemed to defy his circumstances. "The Great Gatsby again," he'd said when I walked in with the book. "Don't you think that's a bit on the nose for a cancer ward?" I laughed, surprised by his humor. "Would you prefer something more upbeat?" I have the bell jar in my back. That had made him laugh too, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to brighten the sterile hospital room. We'd spent the next hour talking about literature, life, and everything in between. By the time I left, I knew I'd met someone special. Over the next few weeks, I found myself visiting Thomas more frequently. He told me about his life, how he'd built his investment firm from nothing, how he'd lost his wife to cancer 15 years ago, how his children were scattered across the globe, too busy with their own lives to visit their dying father. "It's my own fault," he'd said without bitterness. "I spent so many years building my empire, I forgot to build relationships. Now look at me, all the money in the world and not a soul to share it with." But that wasn't entirely true anymore, because he had me. I pulled into the hospital parking lot, grabbing my box of belongings from the passenger seat. As I walked through the familiar corridors toward Thomas's room, I thought about Victoria's words, "Enjoy unemployment." She had no idea that some things were worth more than a steady paycheck or a corner office. Thomas was awake when I walked in, his face lighting up despite the obvious pain he was in. "Sarah, what are you doing here so early? Don't you have work?" I set my box down and pulled up my usual chair beside his bed. "Change of plans. Looks like I'll be able to spend more time here after all." He studied my face carefully, his keen intelligence not dulled by illness or medication. "What happened?" "I got fired," I said simply. "My boss didn't appreciate me requesting medical leave to be here with you." "Sarah," His voice was filled with concern. "You shouldn't have done that. Not for me. I'm not worth—" "Don't," I interrupted gently. "Don't say you're not worth it. Every human being deserves to have someone by their side during times like this. Besides," I added with a smile, "that job was slowly killing my soul anyway." He chuckled weakly. "Well, when you put it that way," his expression turned serious. "But what will you do now?" I shrugged, trying to appear more confident than I felt. "I'll figure something out. Right now, let's focus on getting your pain levels under control. The nurse mentioned you refused your morning medication." Thomas looked sheepish. "It makes me too groggy. I hate not being able to think clearly. And I hate seeing you in pain," I countered, reaching for the call button. "Let's compromise. Take the medication, and I'll read to you until you fall asleep. I brought a new book." He raised an eyebrow. "Please tell me it's not the bell jar." We both laughed, and for a moment, the weight of everything, my lost job, his illness, the uncertainty of the future, seemed to lift. The nurse came in with Thomas's medication, and I settled in to read, pulling out a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. As I read, watching Thomas slowly relax as the pain medication took effect, I thought about how sometimes the biggest sacrifices lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Victoria Marshall thought she was punishing me, but in reality, she'd given me something priceless, the freedom to be exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what I needed to do. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a story that would change both our lives forever. The next few days fell into a rhythm. I'd arrive at the hospital early in the morning, armed with books, crossword puzzles, and an endless supply of terrible jokes that somehow always made Thomas smile. We'd talk for hours about his business empire, my dreams of starting my own marketing consultancy, the books we loved, the lives we lived. Between monitoring his medication schedule and coordinating with his medical team, I learned more about Thomas Edwards the man, not just Thomas Edwards the patient. I learned about his first business venture, a failed computer repair shop in the 1980s that taught him more about resilience than any success ever could. I learned about his late wife, Margaret, and how her passion for art had influenced his early investment choices in emerging digital art platforms. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting long shadows across the room, Thomas asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Why did you really give up your job for me, Sarah?" I looked up from the newspaper crossword we'd been working on together. "I told you." "You told me what you thought I needed to hear," he interrupted gently. "But I want the truth." I set the newspaper aside, considering his question. "Do you remember your first week here, when I was reading to the patients?" He nodded. "I read to 17 people that day. 15 have family with them. 1 have friends visiting. You were the only one alone." I met his eyes. "When I asked the nurse about you, she said you've been here for 3 weeks without a single visitor." It broke my heart. "Ah," he said softly, "pity then." "No," I said firmly, "not pity. Recognition. I recognize something in you that I've always seen in myself. The tendency to give everything to your work, to your goals, until one day you look up and realize you've forgotten to build connections along the way." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "You're too young to be so wise," he finally said. "And you're too important to be alone," I countered. He smiled, though his eyes were suddenly bright with unshed tears. "Important? I'm just a foolish old man, who built one of the largest investment firms in the country," I finished, "who revolutionized ethical investing practices, who created thousands of jobs and changed countless lives. Yeah, I did my research." "Google?" he asked, amused. "LinkedIn, actually. Your profile needs updating, by the way." We both laughed, and the heavy moment passed. But something had shifted between us. A deeper understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits despite our differences in age and circumstances. As the week progressed, Thomas's condition began to deteriorate more rapidly. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about making him comfortable and managing expectations. But Thomas himself remained clear-eyed and determined. "Sarah," he said one evening as the hospital settled into its nighttime routine, "I need you to do something for me." "Anything," I replied, and I meant it. "In my briefcase, the one my secretary brought last month, there's a letter. I need you to deliver it for me." I found the briefcase tucked away in his room's small closet, its leather worn but still elegant. Inside was a sealed envelope addressed simply to Victoria Marshall, CEO, Marshall and Associates Marketing. My heart stopped. Thomas. Yes, he said, watching my reaction carefully. Victoria Marshall, your former boss. Though she doesn't know it, her company's recent success is largely due to my firm's quiet investment and guidance. I stared at the envelope in my hands, my mind racing. You knew? All this time, you knew where I worked. He nodded. I recognized your company ID card that first day. I've been following Marshall and Associates' progress for years. It's one of my more interesting investments. Why didn't you say anything? Because I wanted to get to know you as Sarah, not as an employee of a company I partially own. He shifted in his bed, wincing slightly. And I'm glad I did. It showed me exactly who you are, someone who would give up everything to help a stranger, even when it costs you dearly. I sat down heavily in my chair, the envelope feeling suddenly heavy in my hands. What's in the letter? The truth, he said simply. About investment strategies, about company direction, about leadership. He paused, his expression hardening slightly. About how true success isn't measured in quarterly profits or market share, but in how we treat people. I looked at the envelope, then back at Thomas. When do you want me to deliver it? Tomorrow, he said. I think it's time Victoria Marshall learned a few things about the real costs of success. As I left the hospital that night, the letter safely tucked in my bag, I couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. Victoria Marshall had tried to break me, thinking she held all the power. But sometimes, life has a way of evening the score, not through revenge or malice, but through simple truth and justice. Little did Victoria know, her world was about to change forever, and I had a front row seat to watch it happen. The next morning, I stood in front of Marshall and Associates' gleaming office building, Thomas's letter clutched in my hand. The same security guard who had wished me good morning every day for 3 years now looked at me apologetically. I'm sorry, Ms. Collins, but you're not on the approved visitor list anymore. Ms. Marshall's orders. I smiled, pulling out my phone. Could you please call up to Victoria's office? Tell her I have a letter from Thomas Edwards. The guard's eyes widened slightly at the name. Clearly, he recognized it. After a brief call, he handed me a visitor's badge, his expression puzzled. Ms. Marshall will see you immediately. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt surreal. Just a week ago, I'd been rushing up here, juggling presentation materials and coffee, desperately trying to balance my work life with my volunteer commitments. Now I was calmer than I'd ever been, knowing that what happened next would change everything. Victoria's assistant jumped up when I stepped out of the elevator. Ms. Marshall is waiting for you, she said, hurrying to open the office door. I noticed she couldn't quite meet my eyes. Word of my firing had clearly spread. Victoria sat behind her desk, her posture rigid, her expression carefully neutral. Sarah, she said coolly, I assume this isn't a misguided attempt to get your job back. I placed Thomas's letter on her desk. No, Victoria, this is a delivery from Thomas Edwards. She stared at the envelope, her perfectly manicured hand hovering over it. Thomas Edwards, the investor. The same. I sat down without being invited, enjoying the flash of annoyance that crossed her face. He asked me to deliver this personally. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she picked up the envelope. How do you know Thomas Edwards? He's my patient, I said simply. The one you fired me for helping. The color drained from Victoria's face as the implications hit her. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the letter, her eyes scanning the contents rapidly. I watched as her expression shifted from disbelief to horror to something close to panic. This can't be right, she whispered, more to herself than to me. What's wrong, Victoria? Not the letter you were expecting. She looked up at me, her usual composure completely shattered. He's pulling his investment. All of it, effective immediately. She shuffled through the papers frantically. This would ruin us. The Peterson account, the new office expansion, everything. It's all backed by his firm. I know, I said quietly. You know. Her voice rose sharply. You knew about this and you didn't say anything. When exactly should I have mentioned it? While you were firing me, or while you were threatening to blacklist me from the industry? Victoria stood up abruptly, starting to pace behind her desk. We have to fix this. You have to help me fix this. Talk to him, explain that it was all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. I interrupted, my voice hardening. You fired me for trying to help a dying man. You mocked my compassion and treated basic human decency like a character flaw. That wasn't a misunderstanding, Victoria. That was a choice. She stopped pacing, turning to face me. Please, she said, and I was shocked to hear real desperation in her voice. I'll give you your job back, a promotion, a raise, whatever you want. Just help me save this. I thought about Thomas, lying in his hospital bed, still thinking of others even as his own time grew short. I thought about all the employees at Marshall and Associates who lived in fear of Victoria's moods and arbitrary decisions. I thought about Jenny from accounting crying in the bathroom after another public humiliation, and Mark from creative who had missed his daughter's recital because Victoria demanded last-minute changes to a presentation. I don't want my job back, I said finally, but I will tell you what Thomas told me to say when you made this offer. She leaned forward eagerly. Yes? He says you have a choice. You can keep his investment, keep your position, keep everything, but only if you agree to some changes. What changes? I pulled out another envelope, this one containing the document Thomas had drafted late last night. Complete restructuring of the company's management style. Implementation of proper work-life balance policies, fair medical leave, regular employee satisfaction surveys with real consequences for poor leadership. Oh, and, I pause, enjoying the moment, I'll be overseeing the changes as the new director of employee relations. Victoria's jaw dropped. You're joking. Thomas Edwards doesn't joke about business, I said. You have until the end of the day to decide. Accept these terms or watch everything you've built crumble. She sank into her chair, all pretense of superiority gone. He's really dying, isn't he? Yes, I said softly. He is, and his last act in business will either be saving this company from its toxic culture or making an example of it. The choice is yours. Victoria stared at the documents for a long moment. Finally, she looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something like respect in her eyes. You planned this, didn't you? Getting close to him, telling him about the company. I shook my head. No, Victoria. I just showed kindness to someone who needed it. Everything else, I gestured to the letters on her desk. This was all Thomas. He's been watching this company for years, waiting to see if you'd grow into the kind of leader he could trust. Last week, you showed him exactly who you are. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Victoria picked up a pen, her hand only slightly shaking as she signed the documents. I assume you'll want your own office. Corner office, I corrected. With a view. And I start next week. When I left Victoria's office, the whole floor was eerily quiet. Word would spread soon enough about what had happened, but for now, I savored the peace. I had one more stop to make. Thomas was sleeping when I returned to the hospital, his breathing shallow but steady. I sat in my usual chair, taking his frail hand in mine. It's done, I said softly. She signed everything. His eyes fluttered open, and a small smile crossed his face. Never doubted she would. Victoria Marshall isn't stupid. Ruthless, maybe, but not stupid. Thank you, I said, squeezing his hand gently. For everything. He shook his head slightly. No, Sarah. Thank you. You showed me that even at the end, it's possible to make a difference, to leave things better than we found them. Over the next few days, I split my time between the hospital and the office, setting up the new policies that would transform Marshall and Associates. Victoria, to her credit, threw herself into the changes with the same intensity she'd once used to terrorize her employees. Maybe she was just protecting her investment, or maybe something had genuinely shifted in her understanding of leadership. Thomas held on long enough to see the first employee satisfaction survey results, smiling weakly as I read him the overwhelmingly positive responses. See, he whispered. Sometimes the best investments are in people. He passed away peacefully 3 days later, holding my hand as I read to him from The Great Gatsby, his final joke about inappropriate book choices for a hospital ward. At his memorial service, I was surprised by the number of people who attended, not just business associates and employees, but people whose lives he had touched in quiet ways. Scholarship recipients, small business owners he'd mentored, charity workers he'd supported anonymously. Victoria was there too, standing quietly at the back, looking thoughtful. A month later, I sat in my new corner office, reviewing applications for our expanded employee assistance program. Jenny from accounting poked her head in, grinning. "You'll never believe what just happened," she said. "Victoria approved all the flexible working requests. All of them," and she smiled while doing it. I laughed, glancing at the photo of Thomas I kept on my desk. "People can surprise you sometimes," I said, "especially when someone shows them a better way." As I looked out over the city skyline, I thought about how life has a way of coming full circle. Victoria had fired me for showing compassion, thinking it was a weakness. Instead, that same compassion had led me to Thomas, who showed us all that true strength lies in how we treat others. The company culture at Marshall & Associates was transforming, slowly but surely. Victoria was learning to balance ambition with empathy, and employees were finally feeling valued and heard. It wasn't perfect. Change never is, but it was progress. Every morning, as I walked into the building, I remembered Thomas's words. Sometimes the best investments are in people. He had invested in me when I was just a volunteer reader, seeing something worth nurturing. Now I was investing in others, creating the kind of workplace where kindness wasn't seen as weakness, and where success was measured not just in profits, but in the lives we touched. Victoria still had her moments of old habits creeping back, but now there was a system in place to check her worst impulses. More importantly, she was beginning to see the benefits of a happier, more loyal workforce. Productivity was up, turnover was down, and our reputation in the industry was soaring. 1 year to the day after Thomas's passing, I received a package from his lawyers. Inside was a letter, written in his familiar shaky handwriting during his final days. "Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, a year has passed since our paths crossed. I hope by now you've seen the fruits of our little experiment in corporate transformation. But more than that, I hope you've realized something about yourself. You see, when you walked into my hospital room that first day, I didn't just see someone with a kind heart. I saw a leader, someone who understood that true power comes not from authority, but from empathy, someone who could change not just one company, but potentially an entire industry's approach to human capital. That's why I've left you something else: voting shares in my investment firm. Use them wisely. Look for other companies like Marshall & Associates, businesses with potential held back by toxic leadership. Change them too. You once told me that you gave up your job because you recognized something in me. Well, I recognize something in you too, the future of ethical business leadership. Make me proud. With gratitude and faith, Thomas." I sat in my office for a long time after reading that letter, watching the sun set over the city. In my inbox were dozens of emails from other companies asking about our transformation, wanting to know our secret. On my desk were reports showing record profits alongside unprecedented employee satisfaction scores. Victoria knocked on my door, holding 2 cups of coffee, a peace offering that had become our weekly tradition. "Good news," she said, handing me a cup. "The Peterson account just renewed their contract. They said it's because of our new corporate culture initiatives." I smiled, thinking of that day a year ago when she fired me over this same account. "Funny how things work out, isn't it?" She nodded, looking thoughtful. "You know, I never thanked you properly for what you and Thomas did. You could have destroyed this company, but instead you saved it. Saved me too, if I'm being honest." "Thank Thomas," I said softly. "He believed in the power of second chances. And third and fourth," Victoria added with a wry smile. "I should know." As she left my office, I looked again at Thomas's letter. "Make me proud," he'd written. But I knew he already was proud, not just of me, but of every person in this building who had embraced change, who had learned to balance profit with compassion, who had discovered that success and kindness weren't mutually exclusive. Tomorrow, I would start looking at other companies, seeking out those who needed the same transformation. But for now, I sat in my corner office, sipping coffee and watching the city lights come alive, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought me to Thomas's hospital room, and for the chain of events that proved sometimes losing everything is the first step to gaining something better. The next morning, as I walked into the building, the security guard who had once apologetically turned me away now greeted me with a warm smile. "Good morning, Miss Collins. Making any lives better today." I thought about Thomas, about Victoria, about all the changes we'd made and all the changes still to come. "Every day," I replied. "That's what good investments are all about." And somewhere I knew Thomas was smiling. "You're still doing that internet thing?" My brother David smirked across the Thanksgiving table, carving into his turkey with an air of superiority that only a Wall Street banker could muster. "What is it again?" "Selling stuff on Amazon." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that engaging wasn't worth it. 5 years of these jabs had taught me patience, if nothing else. It's an e-commerce platform, I said quietly, reaching for the mashed potatoes. We help small businesses. Oh, honey, my mother interrupted, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Don't you think it's time to look for a real job? Your cousin Jessica's firm's hiring. My name is Olivia Walker, and for the past 5 years, I've been building what would become one of the most successful e-commerce platforms in the country. Not that my family would know it, to them, I was just their wayward daughter who'd thrown away a promising career in finance to play on the internet. Mom, I started, but my father cut me off with a wave of his hand. Enough, Olivia. This little hobby of yours has gone on long enough. You're 30 years old. It's time to grow up and join the real world. The real world. As if spending 18 hours a day building a company from scratch wasn't real enough. As if the thousands of businesses using my platform weren't real. As if the millions in revenue we were generating wasn't real money. But they didn't know about any of that. I'd stopped sharing details of my business with them years ago, when it became clear they weren't interested in understanding what I was building. To them, success only counted if it came with a corner office and a prestigious company name. Speaking of the real world, David chimed in. Did you hear about my latest deal? Closed it yesterday, biggest merger in the firm's history. My mother beamed, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. That's wonderful, darling. Will this mean another promotion? I pushed my food around my plate, letting their conversation wash over me. It was always like this. David's achievements celebrated, mine dismissed. He was following the path they understood. Prestigious college, Wall Street job, steady climb up the corporate ladder. I dared to do something different, and in their eyes that made me a failure. Later that evening, as I helped my mother clean up in the kitchen, she tried again. Olivia, sweetheart, I'm just worried about you. All this time alone, staring at computer screens. It's not healthy. I scrubbed a pan with more force than necessary. I'm not alone, Mom. I have a team now, 20 people actually. She paused, dish towel suspended midair. You have employees? Yes, I said, keeping my voice level. We moved into a real office space last month. For a moment, I saw a flicker of interest in her eyes, but it quickly disappeared. Well, that must be expensive. Are you sure you're not getting in over your head? And there it was, the constant doubt, the assumption that I couldn't possibly know what I was doing. I'd stopped telling them about my successes because their response was always the same. Concern, skepticism, and thinly veiled disapproval. I'm managing fine, I said shortly, putting the last dish in the drying rack. I should get going. Early meeting tomorrow. Meeting? My father scoffed from the doorway. With your computer? I grabbed my coat and purse, fighting back the urge to tell him exactly who my meeting was with, one of the largest venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. But what was the point? They'd made up their minds about my hobby long ago. The drive home gave me time to decompress, to shake off the weight of their disapproval. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend and COO, Maya. How was the family inquisition? I smiled despite myself. Same as always. David's a genius, I'm wasting my life. You know, the usual. If they only knew, she replied. Can't wait to see their faces when the news breaks. Ah yes, the news. The thing I'd been sitting on for weeks now, wanting to tell my family but knowing they wouldn't understand its significance. The Forbes article was scheduled to come out in less than a month, featuring our company in their annual 30 Under 30 list. But it wasn't just that. They were doing a full profile on our Me2Work rise in the e-commerce space. I pulled into my driveway, my modern townhouse a stark contrast to the modest suburban home I just left. Another sign of success I kept quiet about. My family still thought I lived in my starter apartment, barely making ends meet. Inside, I kicked off my heels and settled onto my couch, opening my laptop to check the day's numbers. Even on Thanksgiving, our platform never slept. The dashboard showed over $500,000 in transactions processed just today, a slow day given the holiday. 5 years ago, this had all been a dream. I was working 60-hour weeks at a prestigious financial firm, doing exactly what my parents wanted and feeling completely unfulfilled. The idea for my platform came from watching small business owners struggle with online sales. They needed something simpler, more intuitive, more integrated than what was available. I started building it nights and weekends, learning to code through online courses, piecing together the foundation of what would become Walker Commerce. When I quit my job to pursue it full-time, my family thought I was having a mental breakdown. "She's throwing away everything she's worked for," I overheard my mother telling her friends. And for what? Some website. Those early days were brutal. Living on savings, working from my tiny apartment, dealing with endless technical challenges and skeptical potential clients. But slowly, steadily, it started to work. Small businesses signed up. The platform grew. Revenue started trickling in. I hired Maya first, my old college roommate who'd been quietly cheering me on from the beginning. She left her corporate job to join me, believing in my vision when even I had doubts. Together, we refined the platform, expanded our services, and started building a real company. My phone buzzed again. An email from our lead developer about a new feature launch. I responded quickly, then noticed another message from our PR team about the upcoming Forbes piece. They wanted to schedule a photo shoot next week. A photo shoot for Forbes magazine. Sometimes it still felt surreal. The next morning, I was in our office early as usual. The space was modern and open, with exposed brick walls and huge windows. A far cry from the corporate cubicles my family thought represented success. Our team would be in later, but I liked these quiet moments to focus on strategy. "You're here early," Maya said, walking in with 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one, settling into the chair across from my desk. Still recovering from family fun. I took a grateful sip, just the usual drama. Dad asked if I was still doing that internet thing. Maya rolled her eyes. As opposed to what he's doing, running the same insurance agency his father started 50 years ago. "Hey," I protested weakly, "that's a real business." "Right," she laughed, "because helping thousands of small businesses succeed isn't real enough." She had a point. Our platform had processed over $100 million in transactions last month alone. We'd helped countless small businesses survive and thrive during the pandemic by giving them easy access to online sales. Our latest valuation put us at just over $500 million. But try explaining that to people who thought success meant wearing a suit and sitting in meetings all day. "The Forbes piece comes out in 3 weeks, Maya reminded me. "Have you decided how you're going to tell them?" I sighed, leaning back in my chair. I was thinking of just letting them find out when it publishes. Is that petty? After 5 years of them dismissing everything you've built? No, it's not petty. It's karma. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of our development team, eager to show us the latest platform updates. Soon the office was buzzing with activity. Designers collaborating on user interface improvements, customer service reps helping clients optimize their stores, marketing team members planning our next campaign. This was my real world. A thriving company built from nothing but an idea and relentless determination. Every person here believed in what we were doing, understood the vision I had from the beginning. Unlike my family, they didn't need to see my name in Forbes to know we were building something extraordinary. Later that afternoon, I had a video call with our newest board member, a veteran tech entrepreneur who'd invested in our latest funding round. "The numbers look fantastic," he said, reviewing our monthly report. "You've built something remarkable here, Olivia. Not many founders can scale this fast while maintaining such strong fundamentals." I smiled, remembering my father's dismissive comments about my little hobby. "Thank you," I said. "We're just getting started." Indeed, the Forbes piece should help with visibility. Have you thought about how this might change things? I had thought about it, probably more than I should have. The article wouldn't just announce our inclusion in the 30 under 30 list. It would detail our growth, our valuation, our impact on the e-commerce landscape. It would make public everything I'd kept quiet about for years. "I'm prepared for the attention," I assured him. "We've got a solid PR strategy in place." What I didn't say was that I was more concerned about my family's reaction than any public scrutiny. How would they handle learning that their failing daughter had built a $500 million company right under their noses? That evening, as I worked late in my office, my mother called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but guilt won out. "Hi, Mom." "Olivia, honey, I've been thinking about what we discussed yesterday," she began, her voice taking on that careful tone she used when she thought she was being helpful. "Jessica's firm really would be perfect for you. They even offer great benefits. I pinched the bridge of my nose, staring at the multiple monitors on my desk displaying our platform's real-time analytics. Over 10,000 transactions have been processed just in the time since she'd started talking. Mom, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not looking for a job. My business is doing well. But is it stable? Do you have health insurance? A retirement plan? These are important things, Olivia. I thought about our comprehensive benefits package, the equity all our employees received, the 401 matching we'd implemented last year. But explaining any of that would just lead to more questions I wasn't ready to answer. I'm fine, Mom. Really. She sighed, that heavy, disappointed sound I'd grown so used to. I just don't understand why you won't consider other options. Your brother. I have to go, I interrupted. I have a call with our West Coast team. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a moment, looking around my office. The wall opposite my desk displayed our company values in bold letters: innovation, integrity, impact. Below them hung framed articles from various tech publications praising our platform's innovations. None of them meant anything to my family. They weren't from the Wall Street Journal or Financial Times, so they didn't count. Maya stuck her head in, waving a tablet. Final approval needed on the Forbes photo shoot location. They want to do it here in the office. Thoughts? I nodded. Makes sense. Just make sure they get shots of the team, not just me. This isn't a one-woman show. Speaking of the team, she said, settling into a chair, morale is through the roof since we announced the new equity distribution. People are excited about the growth. Our latest funding round had allowed us to increase everyone's equity stakes, something I was particularly proud of. Everyone who helped build this company deserved to share in its success. That's good, I said, then hesitated. Maya, am I being childish about my family? Should I just tell them everything? She considered this for a moment. Remember when you first started and they told you it was just a phase? That you'd come crawling back to your real job within 6 months? I nodded. And remember when you landed your first major client and they said it was just luck? That you couldn't build a sustainable business on the internet? Yes. And remember last Thanksgiving when your brother literally patted you on the head and said maybe you could help him build a website for his dog's Instagram? I couldn't help but laugh at that memory. Okay, I get your point. They've had 5 years to take an interest in what you're building, to ask real questions, to understand why you believed in this so much. They chose not to. Let them find out with everyone else. She was right, of course. My family's dismissal of my work wasn't just about lack of understanding, it was about lack of respect. They decided early on that my path wasn't valid, that success only counted if it followed their predetermined script. Well, they were about to learn just how wrong they'd been. The morning the Forbes article was scheduled to go live, I sat in my office, staring at my phone. 3 weeks had passed since Thanksgiving, and my family remained blissfully unaware of what was coming. I declined their weekly dinner invitations, citing work commitments, which wasn't entirely untrue. Preparing for the publicity around the Forbes piece had kept us all busy. It's live, Maya announced, bursting into my office with her tablet. And it's, wow. I took the tablet from her, my heart racing as I read the headline. The Future of E-Commerce. How Olivia Walker Built a $500 million empire from her apartment. The article was everything our PR team had hoped for and more. It detailed our company's explosive growth, our innovative approach to helping small businesses, and the impact we'd had on the e-commerce landscape. There were photos of our office, our team, and yes, me, described as the visionary founder revolutionizing online retail. Your phone's about to blow up, Maya warned just as it started buzzing with notifications. LinkedIn messages, Twitter mentions, email alerts, text messages from friends and former colleagues. But nothing yet from my family. They didn't exactly follow tech news. That changed about an hour later. Olivia, my mother's voice was shrill through the phone. Why is Jessica calling me asking about you being in Forbes magazine? I took a deep breath. Because I am in Forbes magazine, Mom. The article just came out this morning. But how? Why? What's this about a $500 million company? That would be my little hobby, I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. The one you and Dad have been telling me to quit for the past 5 years. Silence on the other end. Then, we're coming over. To your office. Right now. Mom, I have meetings. Cancel them, she interrupted. Your father and I, we need to see this for ourselves. I looked at my calendar, back-to-back calls with investors and partners interested in the Ford's coverage. I can't just cancel everything. I'm running a company, remember. Please, Olivia, her voice softened. We need to understand. I sighed, signaling to Maya through the glass wall of my office. She nodded, already understanding what I needed. Fine. Come at 2. I'll have my assistant send you the address. Assistant, my mother squeaked, but I'd already hung up. Maya stuck her head in. Family drama incoming. They're coming here at 2. Can you? Already rescheduling your afternoon, she finished. Want me to warn the team? I nodded. Our employees knew bits and pieces about my family situation. It was hard to hide when we all worked so closely together. Just let them know we'll have visitors. The next few hours were a blur of calls and emails, responding to the wave of interest generated by the Ford's piece. Our PR team was fielding media requests, our sales team was swamped with inquiries, and our servers were handling record traffic from people checking out the platform. At exactly 2 p.m., the elevator doors opened and my parents stepped into our office. Their expressions as they took in the space, the modern decor, the bustling workforce, the wall of press mentions, were almost comical. Ms. Walker, our receptionist called out, your parents are here. Heads turned throughout the office. I could feel my team watching, curious about the family they'd heard so much about. I stepped out of my office to greet them. Mom, Dad, welcome to Walker Commerce. My mother was clutching her purse like a lifeline, her eyes darting around the space. My father stood rigid, his face unreadable. This is all yours, he asked. Yes, I said simply. Would you like a tour? I led them through the office, explaining each department's function, introducing key team members. Maya joined us partway through, adding context about our growth and achievements. So when you said you had employees, my mother trailed off, watching our development team collaborate on a new feature. We have 78 full-time employees now, I supplied, plus contractors and part-time staff. 78? My father's voice cracked slightly. We ended up in my office, where I gestured for them to sit. The Ford's article was still open on one of my monitors, and my father's eyes locked onto it. $500 million, he said quietly. Your company is worth $500 million. As of our last valuation round, yes. I sat behind my desk, feeling strangely calm. That was 2 months ago. Given the Ford's coverage, it's probably higher now. My mother was shaking her head slowly. But? How? When? Why did you tell us? When would you have listened? I asked. When I started the company, you told me I was throwing my life away. When I landed my first major clients, you told me it was just luck. When I hired my first employees, you worried I was getting in over my head. We were concerned, my father defended. The internet, it's not stable. We wanted you to have a real career. This is a real career, Dad. Look around you. This is as real as it gets. Just then, Maya knocked and entered with a tablet. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. CNBC wants to do a live interview tomorrow morning. I glanced at the email she was showing me. Book it and get PR to prep a briefing. My parents watched this exchange with wide eyes, seemingly struggling to reconcile this version of me, the CEO, the decision maker, with their image of their failing daughter. All this time, my mother said softly, when we thought you were struggling, you were building this. Yes, Mom. All those family dinners where you pushed job listings at me. I was already employing dozens of people. All those times you worried about my stability. I was raising millions in venture capital. All those moments you compared me to David. I was building something bigger than his entire firm. My father flinched at that. Olivia, you didn't believe in me, I finished. You didn't even try to understand what I was doing. You just decided I was failing because I chose a different path. That's not fair, he protested. We wanted to protect you. No, I said firmly. You wanted to control me. You wanted me to follow your definition of success. But look where I am now. I did this my way, without your support, without your approval, without your help. My mother was crying silently now, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. My father looked lost, his usual confidence shattered. I think, he said slowly, we owe you an apology. Several, actually, Maya muttered from the doorway. I shot her a look, but couldn't help smiling. Why didn't you tell us? My mother asked again. About any of this? I leaned back in my chair, considering the question. Would it have changed anything? Would you have suddenly understood what I was building? Would you have stopped pushing me to get a real job? They exchanged glances, unable to answer. That's what I thought, I said. I stopped telling you about my successes because you'd already decided I was failing. Nothing I said would have changed your minds until something like this. I gestured to the Forbes article, forced you to see the truth. Just then, my phone buzzed with another notification. I have a call with Singapore in 5 minutes, I said, standing. Maya can show you out. Singapore. My father repeated weakly. We're expanding into Asian markets, I explained. The call's with our new regional partners. My mother stood, clutching her purse. Olivia, please, can we have dinner tonight? As a family? We need to talk about all this. I looked at them, really looked at them. My father, who'd spent years telling me I was wasting my potential. My mother, who'd worried I was throwing my life away. They looked smaller somehow, their certainty about the world and their place in it shaken. I can't tonight, I said. We're having a company celebration for the Forbes piece, but maybe this weekend. They nodded, accepting this small concession. As they turned to leave, my father paused at the door. We were wrong, he said quietly. About everything. I hope you can forgive us. After they left, Maya returned to my office. Well, that was intense. I laughed, but it came out shaky. 5 years of dismissal and doubt, ended by one magazine article. Not just any article, she corrected. A Forbes profile about the $500 million company their failing daughter built while they weren't paying attention. That evening, at the company celebration, I looked around at my real family, the team that had believed in me, worked with me, helped build this dream into reality. We'd done this together, proving that success doesn't always look like what others expect it to. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Just saw the Forbes piece. Holy shit, sis. Why didn't you say anything? I smiled, typing back. You mean about my little internet hobby? The next few weeks were a whirlwind of media appearances, speaking engagements, and endless congratulatory messages. My parents attended every interview they could find, sitting in the audience with expressions somewhere between pride and embarrassment. At the first family dinner after the Forbes reveal, the dynamic was completely different. Gone were the job suggestions and worried looks. Instead, they asked real questions about the business, actually listening to my answers. I still can't believe it, my mother said, passing the salad. All this time when you thought I was failing. I finished. Maybe that's the lesson here. Success doesn't always look the way you expect it to. David, who'd flown in specially for the dinner, shook his head. I feel like such an idiot. All those times I made fun of your website. You were an idiot, I agreed cheerfully. But at least you admit it now. My father cleared his throat. Olivia, I've been thinking. The agency, maybe it's time we looked at modernizing our systems. If you think your platform could help. I smiled, remembering all the times he dismissed online business as a fad. I'll have my team reach out to you next week. We have a great solution for insurance agencies. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The daughter they thought was failing was now in a position to help modernize the family business. Later that night, as I drove home, I thought about how success is often quietest just before it becomes undeniable. For years, I'd worked in relative obscurity, building something my family couldn't understand or appreciate. But I believed in my vision, even when no one else did. My phone buzzed with a message from Maya. CNBC tomorrow morning. Ready to shock more people who underestimated you? I smiled, thinking about all the other dreamers out there, facing their own doubting families, their own uphill battles. Maybe my story would help them hold onto their vision, even when everyone else called it a hobby. Because sometimes the biggest success stories start with someone saying, "You'll never make it," and one person deciding to prove them wrong. I sold the house, Frank announced over the phone, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. Got a great price too. The new owners move in next week, so if there's anything of your mother's junk you want, you better come get it now. I gripped my phone tighter, willing my voice to stay steady. You sold Mom's house? Without telling me. Hey, I don't need your permission, kid. I'm her husband, remember? Or was, until he paused and I could practically hear the fake grief in his voice. Well, she'd want me to move on. Start fresh. Start fresh. That's what Frank called selling the Victorian house my great-grandfather had built, the home where 4 generations of my family had lived, the place where my mother had taken her last breath just 3 months ago. My name is Emma Mitchell, and until my mother married Frank Turner 5 years ago, I thought I understood what family meant. Mom and I had been a team since Dad died when I was 12. We'd faced everything together. The hard years when she worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, the triumph when she finally opened her own bookstore, the quiet evenings spent reading in the window seat my great-grandfather had built. Then Frank came along. He swept Mom off her feet with his charming smile and smooth talk about real estate investments. I was away at college by then, studying law at Berkeley, too far away to see what he really was. By the time I realized it was too late, Mom was in love and Frank had moved into our family home. "I'll be by tomorrow to pick up Mom's things," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Make it quick," Frank replied. "I've got people coming to clear out the furniture this weekend. High-end antiques buyers. This stuff might be sentimental to you, but it's worth a pretty penny to collectors." I ended the call before he could say anything else. Standing in my small San Francisco apartment, I looked at the photo on my desk, Mom and me in front of the house on my high school graduation day. She was beamy with pride, her arm around my shoulders. The golden afternoon light caught the distinctive stained glass window above the front door, the one my great-grandmother had designed. What Frank didn't know, what Mom had made sure he would never know, was that 3 weeks before she died, she had called me home for an urgent conversation. I remembered that day clearly. Mom was already weak from the cancer, but her mind was sharp as ever. She'd handed me an envelope, her hands trembling slightly. "The house is yours now, Emma," she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've transferred the deed to your name. Frank doesn't know, and he can't know. Not until after." I tried to protest, but she'd been adamant. "I've watched him, Emma. Seen how he looks at the house, at the antiques, at everything your great-grandparents built. He's not what I thought he was. Promise me you'll protect it." I promised, holding her hand as she explained how she'd worked with her lawyer in secret, using her maiden name to avoid suspicion. The deed transfer was completely legal, filed quietly with the county under my name. Now, as I packed an overnight bag for the drive to Sacramento, I touched the small safe where I kept the deed. Mom had known, had seen through Frank's facade in those final months. She protected our legacy the only way she could. The drive from San Francisco to Sacramento took longer than usual, traffic crawling through the Bay Area before finally opening up on I-80. As the familiar neighborhoods of my hometown appeared, my chest tightened. I hadn't been back since the funeral, couldn't bear to see Frank living in our house like he owned it. Well, technically he didn't own it. Not anymore. Not ever, really, though he didn't know that yet. The house looked exactly the same as it had for the past 100 years. 3 stories of Victorian elegance, with a wraparound porch where Mom and I used to drink lemonade on summer evenings. Frank's expensive SUV sat in the driveway, gleaming in the late afternoon sun. He opened the door before I could knock, looking irritatingly pleased with himself. "About time you showed up. I've got boxes in the living room. Try to be quick about it." I stepped past him into the foyer, my heart aching at the familiar scent of lemon furniture polish and old wood. Mom had always insisted on using the same polish her grandmother had used, keeping the walnut paneling gleaming. The living room was full of boxes, our family heirlooms tossed in carelessly. I saw my great-grandmother's Tiffany lamp wrapped in newspaper, the leather-bound first editions Mom had collected stacked like ordinary paperbacks. "The antiques dealers are coming Saturday," Frank said, following me into the room. "High-end guys from San Francisco. They're practically salivating over the furniture. Do you know how much Victorian pieces go for these days?" I did actually. Mom had made sure I understood the value of everything in the house, not just sentimental but financial. The walnut dining set alone was worth close to $50,000. "You can't sell these things, Frank," I said quietly, picking up a framed photo of Mom as a little girl sitting on the very porch swing he'd probably already promised to some dealer. He laughed, the sound grating on my nerves. "Of course I can. I'm the husband, remember. Everything your mother owned is legally mine now." I set down the photo carefully. "Actually, that's not true." "What are you talking about?" His voice sharpened slightly. "Mom left everything to me. The house, the furniture, all of it. She transferred ownership before she died. He stared at me for a moment, then laughed again, but there was an edge to it now. Nice try, kid. But I think I'd know if my wife had done something like that. Would you? I asked, pulling the deed from my bag. Like you knew about her private bank account or the safety deposit box she kept in her maiden name. The smirk faltered slightly. What are you talking about? Mom saw through you, Frank. In the end, she understood exactly what kind of man you are. She protected what was ours. His face darkened. Give me that, he snapped, snatching the deed from my hands. I let him take it, watching as he scanned the document, his expression changing from dismissive to confused to something close to panic. This can't be legal, he sputtered. I'm her husband. She couldn't just. She could and she did. Everything was done properly, filed with the county weeks before she died. The house is mine, Frank. So is everything in it. He stared at me, his face reddening. I've already sold it. The papers are signed. The buyers. Can't buy what you don't own. I finished for him. Maybe you should call them. And the antiques dealers. And your realtor. I'm sure they'll all be very interested to learn you were selling property that doesn't belong to you. You little. He took a step toward me, his hands clenching into fists. Careful, I said softly. I've got copies of everything. One wrong move, and fraud charges will be the least of your worries. The silence that followed was deafening. Frank stood there, the deed crumpled in his fists, his face a storm of rage and disbelief. Outside, a car drove past, its tires crunching on the gravel driveway. Somewhere upstairs, the old grandfather clock chimed 4 times, just as it had every hour of my childhood. You can't do this, he finally said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Your mother, she wouldn't. My mother, I cut him off, knew exactly what she was doing. She protected our family's legacy from you. Now, I think you should leave. Leave? This is my home. I shook my head slowly. No, Frank, it never was. You just thought it was yours to take, like everything else you've tried to steal from us. He opened his mouth to argue, but I could see the realization dawning in his eyes. The deed was ironclad, the transfer legal and complete. He had no claim to the house, the furniture, any of it. I'll fight this, he threatened, but weakly. Go ahead, I replied calmly. I'm sure the court would be very interested in how you tried to sell property you didn't own, not to mention the items you've already sold from the house. Mom kept excellent inventory records, you know. His face went pale at that. We both knew what he'd been doing these past 3 months, selling off smaller pieces, things he thought wouldn't be missed. But Mom had documented everything, and now those sales would come back to haunt him. Frank's unraveling was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. First came the denial. He spent 20 minutes on the phone with his lawyer, his voice rising steadily as he realized just how thoroughly Mom had outmaneuvered him. Then came anger, pacing the living room like a caged animal, alternating between threats and attempts at manipulation. We can work something out, he said, trying to sound reasonable. Split the proceeds from the sale. That's fair, right? Your mother would want us to be fair. I sat in my great-grandmother's wing-back chair, the one he'd probably planned to sell for a small fortune, and watched him unravel. My mother, I said quietly, wanted me to protect our family's home from you. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. You ungrateful little. He caught himself, visibly trying to regain control. Think about this rationally. The buyers are paying $2 million for this place. That's $1 million each if we split it. You're young. You could do a lot with that kind of money. I looked around the room, at the built-in bookshelves my great-grandfather had crafted by hand, at the ceiling medallion Mom had carefully restored one summer when money was tight. This house isn't for sale, Frank. Not now, not ever. His face darkened. You'll regret this. I've got connections in this town. I can make things very difficult for you. Like you made things difficult for Mom. I asked, watching him freeze. Those last few months when she was sick, when you were already selling off her jewelry, did you think she didn't notice? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I needed the money for her medical bills. No, you didn't. Her insurance covered everything. You needed the money for your gambling debts. That hit home. His face went pale. How did you? Mom knew everything, Frank. She just couldn't face it while she was sick. But she made sure I would know. She kept records. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos. Screenshots of his online gambling accounts, records of pawn jewelry, bank statements showing suspicious transfers. Mom had documented it all in her final months, working with her lawyer to build a case even as cancer ravaged her body. She didn't want me to use these unless I had to, I said, watching his expression shift from shock to fear. She hoped he'd just walk away when the time came. But we both know you're not going to do that, are you? He sank onto the sofa, suddenly looking much older. What do you want? I want you out, today, and I want everything you've sold returned. That's impossible. Some of those pieces are already. Then you'll repay their value. Every piece, Frank. Mom's jewelry, the silver, the first editions you snuck out when you thought no one was watching. All of it. He laughed, but it was hollow. With what money? You just said yourself I've got gambling debts. I smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. Actually, you've got about $800,000 in your offshore account. The one you opened in the Caymans last year. That stopped him cold. How could you possibly know about that? Mom's lawyer was very thorough. Did you really think you could hide money from a woman who ran her own business for 20 years? She tracked every penny you tried to squirrel away. The next few hours were a blur of activity. I called Mom's lawyer, who arrived with the sheriff in tow. Frank's realtor showed up, flustered and apologetic when she learned she'd been trying to sell property her client didn't own. The buyer's agent was less understanding, threatening legal action until she saw the valid deed in my name. Through it all, Frank sat in stunned silence, watching as his carefully constructed plans crumbled around him. By sunset, he was loading his personal belongings into his SUV while the sheriff supervised. You'll never get away with this, he tried one last time as he carried out his last box. People in this town know me. They trust me. They trusted you. I corrected him. Until now. How do you think they'll feel when they learn you tried to sell stolen property? That you were gambling away your dying wife's jewelry? He slammed the SUV's trunk shut with more force than necessary. You think you're so smart, just like your mother, but you're making a mistake. This house, all this old junk, it's a burden. You'll see. I stood on the porch in the same spot where Mom and I had spent countless evenings talking about our dreams. No, Frank, the only mistake was Mom trusting you. But she fixed that in the end, didn't she? As his car disappeared down the street, Mom's lawyer, Patricia, joined me on the porch. You handled that well, she said. Your mother would be proud. She knew what he was, I said softly. In the end, she knew. Patricia nodded. She wanted to confront him, you know. But she was worried he'd do something drastic if he knew she was onto him. This way, she knew you'd be protected. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I took a leave of absence from my law firm and moved back home temporarily. There was so much to do, documenting everything in the house, tracking down items Frank had sold, reinstating the property insurance in my name. The local newspaper ran a story about Frank's attempted fraud. Other victims came forward. Elderly clients whose antiques he'd undervalued and bought, only to sell at massive profits. The district attorney's office opened an investigation. But the real work was emotional. Every room held memories, every object a story. I found Mom's diary hidden in her dresser, its pages full of her growing suspicions about Frank, her determination to protect our family's legacy. I was a fool, she'd written. But I won't let him take what generations of our family built. Emma will know what to do. The community rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door brought over her famous enchiladas and told me stories about Mom from before I was born. Mr. Chen from the hardware store helped me track down period-appropriate materials to restore the back porch. One morning, as I was sorting through old photographs in the attic, I found a letter from my great-grandmother to my grandmother, written in 1952. This house is more than wood and glass, she'd written. It's the heart of our family. Every nail, every floorboard, every window holds our stories. Guard it well, my darling. Pass it on with love. That letter became my guide as I began the process of not just reclaiming the house, but reviving it. I hired restoration experts to repair what time had worn. The stained glass window above the front door gleamed again, casting rainbow shadows across the foyer floor. Frank's prediction about the house being a burden proved exactly wrong. The very things he saw as dollar signs, the antique furniture, the architectural details, the history, were what made it priceless. 6 months after I confronted Frank, I got the call I'd been waiting for. He'd been indicted on multiple counts of fraud and theft. The DA had found a pattern of deception going back years before he met Mom. He took a plea deal that required him to repay his victims, including the full value of everything he'd sold from our house. That evening, I sat in the window seat Mom had loved so much, looking out at the garden where she taught me the names of flowers. The house felt alive again, filled with the warmth she'd always maintained. My phone buzzed, a text from Patricia. The last of Mom's jewelry had been located at a pawn shop in Reno. Everything would be returned by the end of the week. I smiled, touching the key pendant Mom had given me for my 16th birthday. She'd worn it every day until she got sick, telling me it was more than just jewelry. It was a symbol of our connection to this place, to our history. A year after that confrontation in the living room, I stood in front of the house on a warm spring evening. The roses Mom had planted were blooming, their scent filling the air. The porch swing creaked gently in the breeze, just as it had for 4 generations. I decided to keep my apartment in San Francisco, commuting when necessary for work. But the house would always be home. Not just for me, but for the future generations Mom had fought to protect. Inside on the mantel, I placed 3 photographs. One of my great-grandparents on their wedding day, standing proudly in front of their new home. One of Mom and me on my graduation day, and between them, a new addition. Mom in her garden the summer before she got sick, her face radiant as she tended her beloved roses. Frank had seen the house as a commodity, something to be sold off piece by piece. He never understood that its true value wasn't in its antiques or its architecture, but in the legacy of strong women who had called it home. Mom knew. She made sure that legacy would continue. Sometimes in the quiet evenings, sitting in the same spots where 4 generations of my family had sat before me, I feel Mom's presence. Not in a ghostly way, but in the essence of the place she fought so hard to protect. In the smooth wood of the banister, worn by countless hands. In the garden she tended with such care. In the very bones of this house that has sheltered our family's dreams for over a century. Frank was wrong about one more thing. This house isn't a burden, it's a gift. One that was protected by a mother's love and foresight, passed down through generations of strong women who understood its true value. And someday, I'll pass it on too, along with the stories of how it was almost lost and then saved, including the story of my mother, who in her final months found the strength to outsmart a con man and protect not just a house, but a legacy.